Yo, what's up everyone? It's Eclipse Wizardry, and today we're checking out Hermione touched Harry's scar on the Hogwarts Express and ancient soul magic declared them eternal. Drop a like if you're hyped. Subscribe for daily content. Let's get this story started. Chapter 1, The Lightning and the Logic. The train smelled like old upholstery and someone's forgotten pasty, and Harry Potter thought it was the best smell in the world. He'd found a compartment near the middle of the train, shoved his trunk up into the overhead rack with more effort than he'd expected, and collapsed onto the seat with the particular relief of someone who had spent 10 years being told they didn't deserve to sit down. Outside the window, King's Cross was still visible, a smear of grey platform and waving families, and Harry watched it shrink as the train picked up speed, watched London give way to suburbs, give way to open countryside, and felt something in his chest loosen for the first time in his life. He was leaving. He was actually leaving. The compartment door slid open and a boy with red hair and a smudge of something on his nose leaned in, looked around, and said, "Anyone sitting here? Everywhere else is full." "Go ahead," Harry said. The boy dropped into the seat across from him with the boneless ease of someone who'd done this journey 6 times before and would do it 6 more. "Ron," he said, sticking out a hand. "Ron Weasley." "Harry Potter." Ron's eyes went immediately to his forehead, the way everyone's did, and Harry fought the reflex to pull his fringe down. He'd been doing that his whole life, hiding the scar, making himself smaller, occupying less space. He left his fringe where it was. "Wicked," Ron said, with a sincerity that was somehow less offensive than the reverence Harry had gotten from everyone else in Diagon Alley. Ron said it the way you'd say wicked about a particularly good football goal, admiring but not worshipful. Harry decided he liked him. They talked for a while in the easy, rolling way of 2 boys who'd both been slightly lonely and didn't entirely know what to do with company. Ron showed him a chocolate frog card, Dumbledore, as it turned out, and Harry turned it over and read about the Philosopher's Stone and the defeat of the dark wizard Grindelwald and tried to parse the difference between being famous for surviving something and actually having done something. There didn't seem to be one, from where he was sitting. The countryside outside had gone green and rolling. Ron was halfway through explaining Quidditch, a sport that sounded either brilliant or completely chaotic. Harry couldn't decide, when the compartment door slid open again. A girl stood in the doorway. She was wearing Hogwarts robes that looked like she'd pressed them herself, and she had a great deal of bushy brown hair that seemed to be in the process of escaping whatever she'd tried to do with it. She was holding a book with one finger marking her place, and she had the look of someone who had already checked every other compartment and found them wanting in ways she was too polite to specify. "Has anyone seen a toad? A boy named Neville's lost one." She looked between them with quick, assessing eyes. "Haven't seen one, sorry," Harry said. "I'll keep looking, then." She didn't move. Her eyes had landed on Harry's forehead, but only for a moment, and then they went to his face, which was different from how most people did it. "You're Harry Potter." "Yeah. I've read about you." "Well, about what happened?" "There's not much, actually. Most of the books are quite vague on the details, which is interesting in itself. The curse rebounding should have left traces, theoretically. Residual magical signatures in the..." She stopped herself. "Sorry. I do that." "Do what?" "Think out loud." She looked faintly embarrassed, but the kind of embarrassed that happened after the fact, because in the moment of thinking out loud there had been no embarrassment at all. "It's fine," Harry said. "What kind of traces?" She blinked at him. Clearly most people did not ask follow-up questions. "Well, a redirected Avada Kedavra, if that's actually what happened, would have left a magical impression on whatever surface it struck. Stone, wood, flesh. The fact that it left a scar suggests the curse didn't fully rebound cleanly. Some of the energy," she stopped again, differently this time. "Is it strange to talk about?" "I wasn't thinking." "No," Harry said, and meant it. "Nobody ever talks about it. I'd rather know." She smiled at him then, quick and genuine. "Hermione Granger," she said. "Harry Potter. This is Ron Weasley." "Hi," said Ron, with the tone of someone who had been more interested in Quidditch and was now adrift. Hermione looked at the empty seat beside Harry, then at Harry. "May I? I've already found Neville's toad." "Well, it found me, actually. It was under a seat 3 compartments back. I returned it and then there wasn't anywhere comfortable to read." She held up her book, as if this explained everything, which to her it clearly did. "Sure," Harry said, and moved toward the window to give her room. She sat down, opened her book, and for approximately 90 seconds actually read it. Then she looked up at Harry again. "Does it still?" She stopped. "Still what?" "Your scar. Does it hurt? I've been wondering about residual pain in cursed scar tissue. The books that mention it at all are contradictory." Harry considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Not usually. Sometimes I don't know. Headaches. But I've always had those." "Interesting." Her eyes went to his forehead with that same analytical focus, and Harry found he didn't mind it the way he minded other people staring. Other people stared like the scar was a trophy in a case. She stared like it was a problem she wanted to solve. "You can look at it properly if you want," he said. "Everyone stares anyway. At least you're doing it for a reason." She went briefly pink. "I wasn't trying to be rude." "You weren't. I mean it, go ahead." She hesitated for only a second. Then she leaned forward, pushed his fringe back with the careful confidence of someone who was used to handling things that needed to be treated precisely, and looked at the scar with her face very close to his. Harry went completely still. Not because of proximity, though that registered too, in some distantly surprised part of his brain, but because of a feeling that was rising through him from somewhere deep, like groundwater finding a crack in stone. Something was listening. Something old and enormous, the way a landscape is enormous, more presence than thing, and it was paying very specific attention to this exact moment. He could see Hermione's face. Her eyes were bright and focused and entirely absorbed. She reached up, absently, with the instinct of a researcher who needed tactile confirmation of what her eyes were telling her, and pressed 2 fingertips gently against the lightning bolt scar. The world went absolutely white. Not a blinding flash, not an explosion or a crack of thunder or anything that would have made sense. It was more like the white of first light, the white of something that had been waiting so long it had forgotten it was waiting, and had simply become the patience itself. Harry felt it move through him like a tide going both ways at once, outward from the scar where her fingers rested, and inward from every surface of himself simultaneously, converging on something in the center of his chest he hadn't known was there. Hermione made a sound. Not a scream. A small, startled exhale, like someone who had reached into water and found it unexpectedly warm. Then it was over. The white receded. The compartment was exactly as it had been. Ron was staring at them both with a half-eaten chocolate frog suspended in his hand. Outside, the countryside rolled on, indifferent. Hermione sat back. She was breathing a little fast. Her fingers were still raised slightly, the 2 that had touched his scar, and she looked at them with an expression Harry couldn't quite name, not afraid, not excited, something that existed in the space between those 2 things. "What was that?" she said. "I don't know," Harry said. He looked at his hands. They felt different, not different like pain or numbness, but different like a room when you've moved the furniture. Everything in the same place, but the space between the things changed. He looked at Hermione and something happened that had never happened to him before. He had the distinct, vertiginous feeling that he already knew her. Not knew of her, not recognized her, knew her. The way you know a room you've lived in so long you can navigate it in the dark. She was looking at him with the same expression. "Something happened," Ron said helpfully. "Yes," Hermione said. She pressed her fingers together, then apart, then together. something definitely happened. She picked up her book, put it down, picked it up again. I need to research this. You've been on the train for 3 hours. I know. She looked at him sidelong. Are you all right? Strangely, yes, Harry said. You? I feel. She paused, visibly looking for the right word with the precision of someone who did not use imprecise words. Settled, she said finally. Which doesn't make any sense, because I've never been less settled. We've just, she gestured vaguely between them. Yeah, Harry said. Ron looked between them. You both look like you've been hit with something. I think we might have been, Hermione said. But she didn't sound frightened. She sounded, Harry thought, like she did when she'd been talking about magical traces and residual curse signatures, like she'd found something interesting, and interesting things were, fundamentally, good. The train rolled on. They ate from the trolley. Harry bought too much of everything with the same overflow of generosity that came from having been hungry more often than not, and distributed cauldron cakes and pumpkin pasties with the largesse of someone making up for lost time. Ron accepted everything with cheerful lack of ceremony. Hermione ate half a pasty and asked the trolley witch if there was anything with actual nutritional content, and the witch looked at her like she'd asked the question in a foreign language. They talked. The three of them, in the way that talking sometimes goes on a long journey, starting in one place and ending somewhere entirely different, the conversation becoming its own landscape. Ron knew an extraordinary amount about Quidditch and almost nothing about anything else, and was disarmingly honest about this. Hermione knew almost everything about everything and was disarmingly honest about that too. Harry listened to both of them and felt, for the first time in his life, like he was allowed to be in the middle of something. Every now and then he was aware of Hermione at the edge of his perception, not looking at her, just aware, the way you're aware of a light source in a dark room. He thought she was aware of him the same way. Neither of them mentioned it again. There was a quality to the silence around the thing that had happened, not the silence of avoidance, but the silence of two people who understood that some things needed to be understood before they could be spoken. By the time darkness was filling up the windows and Hermione had changed into her robes and was making increasingly pointed remarks about Ron's untucked shirt and Harry was trying not to laugh, the odd sense of resonance had settled into something Harry could almost ignore. Almost. He didn't want to ignore it, though. That was the thing. They pulled into Hogsmeade Station in the dark, and Harry climbed off the train into cold October air and lantern light and a voice bellowing, "Furs years, this way." A voice attached to the largest human being Harry had ever seen, with a great black beard and beetle-black eyes that creased when he smiled. "That's Hagrid," Ron said, appearing at his shoulder. "Keeper of keys and grounds at Hogwarts. He's brilliant." Hagrid spotted Harry immediately, the same reflex everyone had, but his grin was so broad and unguarded that Harry found himself grinning back before he'd decided to. "Harry," Hagrid said, as if seeing him was the best thing that had happened all day. "Look at ya, just like your mum and dad." Harry didn't know what to do with that yet, so he filed it away. They crossed the Black Lake in small boats, Harry, Ron, Hermione, and a round-faced boy named Neville who was clutching a toad that Harry correctly assumed was the same toad from the train, and at some point in the middle of the lake Harry looked up and saw Hogwarts for the first time. It hit him somewhere under the sternum. It wasn't the size of it, though it was enormous. It wasn't the towers or the lit windows or the way the whole thing seemed to have grown out of the cliff rather than been built on it, which was probably also true. It was something else, a feeling of recognition that he was beginning to suspect was going to be a recurring theme of his life, like seeing something he had always known existed and had never been allowed to know the name of. He heard Hermione make a soft sound beside him. He looked at her. She was looking up at the castle with her face completely open, all the careful composure she carried set aside, and she looked like what she was, an 11-year-old who had spent her whole life believing in a world she hadn't yet been allowed to enter, and was now entering it. "Yeah," Harry said quietly. She glanced at him, startled, then understood that he hadn't needed her to speak. Something flickered across her face that wasn't quite unsettled and wasn't quite pleased. She settled on a small nod, turned back to the castle, and said nothing. Neville's toad fell in the lake. Harry caught it without thinking, reaching over the side of the boat with a reflexive precision that surprised even him, and handed it back. "How did you?" Neville started. "I don't know," Harry said honestly. He'd moved before he'd consciously registered the toad falling, as if his body had already made the decision. He looked at his own hand. Hermione was watching him. He knew without looking. They docked. They climbed stone steps. A stern-faced witch with black robes and a pointed hat and a general demeanor of someone who had done this 47 times and would do it 47 more with no reduction in standards, Professor McGonagall, explained the 4 houses to them and left them in an antechamber while she went to prepare the hall. A cluster of ghosts drifted through the wall and had a conversation about something called the Headless Hunt with the cheerful inconsequentiality of people at a cocktail party, and Harry watched them and thought that in the space of a single day he had traveled from a world where magic didn't exist to one where the impossible was conversational. He could feel Hermione behind him, slightly to his left. Not feel like touch, feel like temperature. Like proximity to something that put out warmth. "Nervous?" she asked him. "A bit." "You?" "Terrified," she said, with a directness that surprised him. "But I'm good at being terrified quietly." "I know," he said. She looked at him sharply. "You can't know that. We met 3 hours ago." He had no good answer to that, because she was right, and also she was wrong, and the contradiction was entirely the fault of whatever had happened when her fingers touched his scar. He shrugged. She almost smiled. "The sortings mentioned in Hogwarts, a history," she said, shifting into territory she could navigate. "It's described as both a traditional and profoundly individual process. Some people find it distressing." "Dumbledore got sorted once," Harry said. "He came out fine." "That's not," she stopped. "Were you trying to be reassuring?" "Trying, yeah. It didn't work." "I know. But it helped anyway," she said, and turned back toward the doors. They were called in. The great hall opened before them and Harry walked into the blaze of candles and 4 long tables and a ceiling that was the night sky, properly the night sky, stars visible between clouds, the same clouds that were over the castle right now, and forgot to be nervous for a moment, just stood there and looked up. The Sorting Hat sat on a stool. It sang a song. Harry watched it with genuine fascination and noted Hermione beside him doing the same, and Ron beside both of them doing the thing where you're paying attention but trying to look like you're not. They called names alphabetically. Granger, Hermione, went up early. Harry watched her walk to the stool with her shoulders set and her chin up, the posture of someone who had decided to be brave whether they felt it or not. The hat dropped over her eyes. It sat for a moment. Gryffindor. She came back past the Gryffindor table with her cheeks flushed and her eyes bright, and as she walked past Harry she met his gaze for exactly a second and something flickered between them, relief, recognition, something warm and wordless, before she took her seat. Longbottom, Neville, was so anxious he forgot to take the hat back off when it shouted Gryffindor, and had to be gently redirected by McGonagall. There was a Malfoy, blonde and self-possessed in a way that was clearly practiced, who went to Slytherin with an air of foregone conclusion and looked satisfied about it. Harry noted him without particular feeling, the way you note weather. "Potter, Harry." He walked to the stool in a silence that was different in quality from any other silence, a concentrated, held-breath silence. He sat down. McGonagall lowered the hat over his head and it slid to his nose and the world went dark. Said a voice in his ear, dry and thoughtful. "Interesting. Very interesting. You've got something new in you, boy, or something very old. Hard to say which. Plenty of courage, I see, not bad intelligence either, there's talent here, and a fine thirst to prove yourself, but there's something else now. Something that wasn't in the last Potter I sorted. A kind of anchor. Where do I go? Harry thought. You know where you belong, the hat said. You've known since you walked through that door. Then say it. The hat, to its credit, didn't make him wait. Gryffindor. The table erupted. Harry pulled off the hat, handed it to McGonagall, and walked toward the noise. He sat down next to a set of identical grinning red-haired twins. The Weasleys were apparently a theme, and several seats down, Hermione looked at him from the Gryffindor table with an expression that said of course. Ron was sorted shortly after, also into Gryffindor, and dropped into a seat with the ease of someone arriving home. Dumbledore stood and the hall went quiet. Harry looked at him properly for the first time, the long silver beard, the half-moon spectacles, the robes that were absurdly purple, the eyes that were both very kind and very sharp at the same time. He said a few words, nonsense words, delightful ones, and then the food appeared, and everything went sideways into noise and laughter and the excellent chaos of 100 children who hadn't eaten in hours. Harry loaded his plate with the thoroughness of someone for whom food had never been guaranteed and ate with complete concentration. Ron appeared to operate on the same philosophy. Hermione ate with somewhat more decorum 3 seats down, talking with a ghost who was silver and cheerful and who introduced himself as nearly headless Nick. Under the noise, Harry was aware of the feeling that had started on the train, that groundwater sensation, that sense of something old and listening. It wasn't intrusive. It was more like a heartbeat you notice when you're quiet enough to hear it. His own, but also not. He looked down at his hand and turned it over. Nothing visible. No mark, no glow, no dramatic physical evidence of anything. He was, to all outward appearances, a boy eating roast chicken at a school feast. He was also, to whatever internal apparatus had woken up in him today, something else entirely. Something he didn't have a name for yet. But Hermione was already thinking about that. He knew without asking. After the feast, the prefects led the first years through the castle, up staircases that moved while you were on them, something Harry adjusted to with the practical equanimity of someone who had never had the luxury of expecting the world to hold still, and through corridors and past portraits that watched them go and up more staircases and finally to a painting of a fat woman in a pink dress. "Password," she said. "Caput Draconis," said Percy, who was clearly a prefect of high self-regard. The portrait swung open. They climbed through the hole. The Gryffindor common room opened up around them, circular, warm, with a fire going and red and gold everywhere and squashy armchairs that looked like they'd been sat in for centuries. It smelled like wood smoke and old books and something Harry couldn't name, something that felt like it had no name because it was purely itself, the smell of a place that had been significant to so many people for so long that significance had become atmospheric. The girls' and boys' dormitories went in different directions. Harry and Ron ended up in a round room with 5 4-poster beds, and Harry found his trunk at the foot of one and sat on the edge of it and looked around at the stone walls and the castle outside the window and the stars beyond that. Ron was already speculating about Quidditch tryouts, which as a first-year Harry could not have, but the speculation was cheerful and included Harry as an audience rather than excluding him as a non-participant, and Harry lay back on his bed and listened with the specific pleasure of someone being talked at by someone who didn't want anything back. He fell asleep faster than he had in years. He dreamed, and in the dream there was a library, not Hogwarts's library, somewhere else, somewhere older, the kind of library where the books are not organized by subject but by weight, by how much they contain, and Hermione was already there, not sitting across from him but present, the same way she was present in the corner of his perception on the train. She had a book open and she was reading and she looked up and said, without surprise, "The earliest references I can find use the Latin vinculum, meaning bond or chain, but the older texts call it something closer to recognition. The magic recognizes something." "What does it recognize?" Harry asked. "That's what I'm reading for," she said, and turned a page. He woke up to grey dawn light through the dormitory window, with the absolute and complete certainty that Hermione Granger had been reading in her own room across the castle while he slept, with a book propped on her knees and a look of furious concentration, trying to find the name for what had happened to them. He was also absolutely certain she hadn't found it yet, but that she would. He got up, got dressed, and went down to the common room to wait. She came down at 6:45, still in her nightclothes with a dressing gown belted over them and 3 books stacked under her arm and her hair doing the thing where it went in all directions simultaneously. She stopped when she saw him, registered that he'd been waiting, and set her books on the nearest table without any comment on the strangeness of either of them being awake this early. "I found references to a soul bond in 2 different texts," she said, pulling out a chair. "Both incomplete. One is from the 1300s and is mostly in a form of Middle English that I can partially translate, and one is from a much older source that was reprinted by someone in the 1800s who thought it was folklore." "What does the folklore one say?" "That when 2 souls of complementary resonance come into contact under the right conditions, an older magic, older than wand work, older than most magical traditions, can recognize them. Declare them, is the word the translation uses." She sat down. She had an ink stain on her right index finger that Harry was fairly sure had not been there yesterday. She had been writing notes. "Declare them what?" "The text says, complete," she said. "Which is either profound or circular, depending on whether you find the concept meaningful. I'm reserving judgment." She tapped the cover of the oldest-looking book, which was cracked at the spine and had the air of something that had not been opened recently enough. "What I keep coming back to is the conditions." "What conditions?" "That's the bit that's vague. The Middle English text uses a phrase I'm rendering as willing touch freely given at the moment of arrival, which," she looked at him. "We were arriving. I reached out. It wasn't performed or ritualized or intentional." She said that last word with the slight irritation of someone who preferred their magic to be intentional. "It just happened." "Is that bad?" "I don't know yet." She turned to a page with a passage she'd underlined in pencil, neatly, precisely, because she underlined things the way most people made furniture, with care for it to be useful afterward. "What I do know is that whatever happened isn't irreversible in any harmful sense. Nothing I've found suggests any negative consequences from the bond itself." She paused. "There are consequences, clearly. I could feel you. This morning, before I came down. You were awake and you were," she looked slightly embarrassed. "Calm." "I knew you were reading," Harry said. "Yes." She looked at the books, then at him. "I think we need to be clear about something. This isn't," she paused in the deliberate way of someone who is choosing words carefully because imprecision would be expensive. "This is something that happened to us. We didn't ask for it. And whatever it means about how our magic works, or how we might develop, it doesn't obligate us to." She stopped. "Be friends?" Harry offered, meaning it as a genuine question. "No. I was going to say be anything in particular." She met his eyes. "We're 11. I'm not going to," she gestured, the specific gesture of someone shooing away a thought. "This is a magical phenomenon and we should study it and understand it. That's what I was going to say." "Okay," Harry said. "But also, yes," she said, before he'd finished. "Also we can be friends." That wasn't in doubt. Something warm and uncomplicated settled in Harry's chest. "Okay," he said again. She opened a book. He leaned over and read the same page, and for a while the common room was empty and quiet around them, the fire just catching, the castle waking up around them in increments of sound and light. At 7:15, Hermione pointed to a passage halfway down the left-hand page. The text was in the reprinted folklore anthology, translated from something much older, and the relevant section read, "When the ancient magic speaks in the manner of recognition, it does not speak to the mind nor to the will but to that which existed before either. It speaks to what is. And it does not repeat itself. What has been declared has been declared." Harry read it twice. "What existed before the mind or will," he said. "The soul, presumably." "That's how I read it," Hermione said. "The magic is pre-rational. It's not interested in whether we think it's convenient. She said this with the tone of someone who found pre-rational things professionally inconvenient and was making peace with that fact. And it does not repeat itself, Harry said. Meaning once is enough. Meaning, she said, it's already done. They looked at each other across the open page, two 11-year-olds in a firelit common room, and the thing that had happened on the train sat between them and was, in the way of ancient things, perfectly unimpressed by their reaction to it. Harry thought about his life as it had been 24 hours ago, the cupboard, the dark, the specific loneliness of someone who has never once been chosen by anything. He thought about the feeling on the lake when he'd looked at Hogwarts, the feeling in his chest when the hat had placed him here, the feeling right now. I'm not upset about it, he said. Neither am I, Hermione said. She said it like it surprised her slightly, and then like the surprise didn't matter. I thought I might be, this morning. I thought about it a lot last night, actually. And she turned the word over. No. Not upset. Good, Harry said. We should tell someone, she said. Eventually. A trusted adult. Dumbledore? She considered this for longer than a straight yes would have taken. Perhaps. Let's understand it better first. It was, Harry would think later, the first decision they made together. Small, reasonable, entirely theirs. They didn't know yet what the magic had set in motion. They didn't know about the stages, didn't know about confluence and declaration and what the bond would mean when the world pressed down on them, which it would, which it inevitably does. What they knew was this: something old and patient had looked at two children on a train and recognized something it had been looking for, and it had said so in the only language it had, which was not words but was unmistakably, permanently yes. Footsteps on the stairs. Ron Weasley appeared, hair at extreme angles, wearing his robes incorrectly. He looked between Harry and the books and Hermione's pencil-underlined pages and said, "You've both been up for hours, haven't you?" "Yes," they said, simultaneously, without having planned to. Ron looked at them for a moment with an expression Harry couldn't quite read, something that hadn't had time yet to become what it would eventually become, still just faint confusion shading toward unease, and then he shook his head and dropped into a chair and said, "Right. Well. When does breakfast start?" 7:30, Hermione said, without looking up. "How do you know everything?" "I read the welcome letter." Ron considered this. "Is that what that was?" he said, and reached for one of the books with the random curiosity of someone who had no intention of actually reading it. Outside the common room window, Hogwarts was brilliant in the morning light, all towers and battlements and the wide autumn sky above it, and the new year was beginning with the specific energy of something that has been waiting a long time to start. Harry looked at it. Then he looked at Hermione, who was reading. Then he looked at Ron, who was pretending to read. He thought, whatever this is, it's mine. For the first time, something is actually mine. The feeling that answered him from somewhere just outside himself was warm and unambiguous. He turned back to the window and let himself have it. Chapter 2, What the Books Don't Say. The first week of Hogwarts moved the way first weeks do, in a blur of staircases and new smells and the particular disorientation of a schedule that demands you be in 6 different places and learn 6 entirely different things before dinner. Harry navigated it with the adaptive ease of someone who had spent his entire childhood being dropped into unfamiliar situations and expected to figure them out without complaint. The classrooms were easy enough to find if you ignored the staircases, which lied, and paid attention to the portraits, which gossiped but were generally directionally accurate. Hermione moved through it like she was completing a checklist she'd made before arriving, which she mostly had. She knew the curriculum, had read ahead in every textbook, and had opinions about the pedagogical approaches of at least 3 of their professors before the end of Tuesday. Harry knew this not because she told him but because he could feel the low, continuous hum of her engagement. That was the only word he had for it, a hum, like a wire carrying current, and it spiked whenever something interested her and went flat whenever something didn't. He hadn't told her that last part yet. The idea of saying "I can feel your intellectual engagement" like a signal on a wire struck him as the kind of thing that needed to be introduced carefully. Transfiguration was first. McGonagall turned her desk into a pig and back again before anyone had sat down, and Harry felt the whole class recalibrate in real time, everyone quietly revising their assessment of how seriously to take this. McGonagall's point was clean and efficient: this is what magic actually is, and you are beginners, and the gap between those two things is your problem to close. Harry respected that. He'd always done better with honest assessments of difficulty than with encouragement that was really just delay. They practiced transfiguration on matchsticks. Most of them achieved nothing. Harry's matchstick developed a point at one end, which McGonagall noted with a look that managed to be both approving and entirely non-committal. Hermione's turned silver. McGonagall gave her a rare full smile and noted it on her register. Hermione's pleasure at this was so sharp Harry almost felt it as a sound. Ron's matchstick smoked slightly, which was interesting but not quite the goal. Charms was Professor Flitwick, who stood on a pile of books to see over his desk and managed to project absolute authority despite this, which Harry filed away as a useful lesson in presence. Potions was Snape, who managed to project absolute authority despite clearly finding everyone in the room a disappointment, which was a different lesson in a different kind of presence. Harry watched Snape with the detached attention he gave most things, cataloguing, not yet judging, and noted the particular quality of cold that came off the man, the cold of someone who had decided that warmth was a form of vulnerability and had been very thorough about the decision. Snape called on him in the first class, the specific calling on of someone with a script. What would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? Where would you look if I told you to find me a bezoar? Questions clearly designed to be unanswerable by an 11-year-old in his first potions lesson. Harry looked at him and felt, in the bond, something from Hermione that was essentially the magical equivalent of "I know this, call on me, I know this." He'd read ahead. Not as systematically as Hermione, but he'd read, and something in him had always been good at remembering things once he'd seen them. It was one of the ways he'd survived the Dursleys, noticing things, retaining things, being always a small step ahead of whatever was coming. Asphodel and wormwood make a sleeping potion so powerful it's called the Draught of Living Death, Harry said. A bezoar is a stone taken from the stomach of a goat, and it will save you from most poisons. He paused, then added, because it was relevant, and monkshood and wolfsbane are the same plant. Also called aconite. The class went very quiet. Snape's eyes narrowed. Harry met them without flinching, which was not bravery exactly. He'd spent 10 years living in a house where adults used coldness as a weapon, and he had a reasonably well-developed immunity to it. What he felt from Snape was dislike, and beneath the dislike something more complicated, something that had his father's name on it and was not actually about Harry at all. 5 points from Gryffindor, Snape said, for impertinence. Someone near the back made a noise of protest. Harry just looked at Snape, and what he was thinking was clear enough in his face: that's fine. I still know the answers. He turned back to his textbook without making a thing of it, and after a moment the class exhaled and moved on. From somewhere 3 seats over, he felt Hermione's focused approval, and then her immediate pivot back to the text, because she was not a person who spent approval when it could be redirected toward learning. He almost smiled. After classes on Thursday, when the first week was winding down into the soft collective relief of Friday approaching, Harry found Hermione in the library. This had become a pattern so quickly it barely felt like choice. He knew, in the general peripheral way of the bond, roughly where she was at most times, and when she was in the library there was a quality to the signal that was like a door standing open. He could go through it or not. Tonight he went through it. She had 4 books open and a system of cross-referenced notes that was either brilliant or deeply alarming, and she looked up when he sat down across from her with the expression of someone surfacing from considerable depth. "How are you organizing those?" he asked, looking at the notes. "Chronologically by original source text, then cross-referenced by terminology," she said. "Watch." She pulled a sheet toward him. He looked at it. It was, genuinely, a very good system. What have you found? She was quiet for a moment, the specific quiet of someone deciding how to present something they're still developing. More than I expected, she said. Less than I need. She tapped a page in one of the books, this one old enough that the pages had gone brown at the edges, and Harry made a mental note to ask how she'd gotten it out of the restricted section, and also to be impressed. The earliest clear reference to what I think happened to us is from the 9th century, written by a wizard named Aldrich of Mercia who was documenting what he called the old workings, magic that predated wands, predated formal theory, operated on principles that even he was reconstructing from memory and tradition rather than direct knowledge. He called it anima vinculum. She said the Latin with the careful precision of someone who has been practicing the pronunciation. Soul binding. But, and this is the important part, the name isn't quite accurate. Aldrich notes it himself. He says the name was given by later scholars who were trying to categorize something that resists categorization. The original magic has no name, in the sense that it predates language-based magical practice. She stopped, clearly reaching for something. Pre-rational, Harry said. He remembered the passage from the common room, the first morning. She'd used that word. Yes. Exactly. She looked at him with the brief, pleased expression of someone whose terminology has been correctly used. It doesn't operate on intent or formula or any of the mechanisms wand magic uses. It operates on something older. Aldrich calls it, that which recognizes itself. Meaning the magic exists everywhere, in everything, and under specific conditions it recognizes a correspondence, a resonance between two people's fundamental magical and personal natures, and it responds to that recognition. By doing what? By making the correspondence permanent, Hermione said. It's already there, that's what Aldrich says, and the three later sources who cite him agree. The bond doesn't create something new. It acknowledges something that was always true. She met his eyes. We were always, she stopped herself, looked at the page. The resonance was always there. The touch just gave the magic a moment of contact, a catalyst. Harry thought about this. What does the permanence mean, practically? Several things. She pulled a different sheet of notes closer. The awareness you already know about, being able to feel each other's general state. Aldrich describes this as the first stage, which he calls awareness. He documents 3 stages beyond that, but his descriptions get increasingly impressionistic. Stage 2 he calls resonance. She hesitated. What? He says it involves the magical cores synchronizing. Spells cast simultaneously or in close proximity becoming significantly amplified. He describes a soul-bonded pair in the 12th century who were both battle mages, and apparently during combat their combined spell work was, she searched for the word. He uses exponential. Which is unusual for a 9th century scholar, the concept of exponents wasn't, Hermione. Right. The point is, our magic may already be doing something. I've noticed in class, specifically in Transfiguration, that when we're working near each other the spells seem to, she made a gesture, a word that hadn't materialized yet. Come easier. Harry had noticed this too. He hadn't been able to name it, but there'd been something in the matchstick exercise, something when he'd glanced at Hermione and the point had sharpened, like borrowing clarity from somewhere. What are stage 3 and whatever comes after? She was quiet again, the deeper quiet this time. Stage 3 is confluence. The ability to access each other's magical reserves. To draw on each other's power directly. She paused. Stage 4 is called, Aldrich uses the phrase declaratio aeterna. Eternal declaration. It's the final stage. He doesn't document a case of it. He says he knows of 2 instances in recorded history, and both descriptions are, she turned a page to a passage she'd marked. He writes, when the ancient magic speaks its final word, it does not speak to the pair alone but to magic itself, and magic remembers. What has been named as eternal cannot be unnamed. The library was quiet. A candle guttered nearby. Harry looked at the passage and felt the weight of it, not fear, just the specific gravity of something significant. So we're nowhere near that, he said. No. We're at stage 1 with possibly early stage 2 effects. And Aldrich seems to suggest the progression isn't automatic, it's catalyzed by circumstance. By shared experience under pressure. She looked up. Which means we're not going to wake up tomorrow in stage 4 unless something dramatic happens. Comforting, Harry said. I thought so. She closed that book and opened another. There's something else. Something that kept appearing in the secondary sources, the ones citing Aldrich, and I keep not knowing what to do with it. Tell me. Every account of an anima vinculum pair notes that the bond is recognized by magic broadly. Not just by the pair. The older magic that creates the bond leaves, Aldrich calls it a signature. Something that other practitioners with sufficient sensitivity can detect. She looked at him carefully. Someone who knew what to look for could know what we are. Harry considered this. The library moved around them, distantly, other students coming and going, the soft sounds of pages and quills and hushed conversation. Dumbledore, he said. He's the most obvious candidate. He's extraordinarily powerful and he's been doing magic for over a century. She folded her hands on the table, a gesture Harry was already learning meant she was about to say something she'd been turning over for a while. I think we should be cautious about who knows. Not because it's shameful or needs to be hidden, I don't think that, but because we don't fully understand it yet, and I'd prefer to understand something before it becomes subject to other people's interpretations. You're worried someone will want to use it. I'm worried about a lot of things, she said candidly. But that one, yes. Harry looked at the ceiling of the library, at the high dark stone and the hanging lanterns, and thought about the quality of Dumbledore's eyes in the Great Hall, very kind, very sharp, the kind of eyes that were always thinking a step ahead. He thought about what it would mean to be useful to someone's plan before you'd even had a chance to figure out your own. Agreed, he said. We understand it first. Then we decide. She nodded once, firmly, and the decision settled between them with the clean weight of something mutually certain. Then she pulled the next book toward her, and Harry looked at the page she opened to, and without particularly planning to they were reading together, the silence between them comfortable as old furniture. You know, he said, after a while, you could have just told me what you found instead of showing me all the sources. I know, she said, without looking up. Why didn't you? She considered this for a genuine moment. Because you should know where the information comes from. So you can evaluate it yourself. She turned a page. I don't want you to just trust me. I want you to see what I've seen. Harry looked at the side of her face, the focused line of it, and thought that this was possibly the most fundamentally respectful thing anyone had ever said to him. Thank you, he said. She looked up briefly, surprised by the weight in it, then seemed to understand the weight and receive it. You're welcome, she said, and turned back to the books. The flying lesson was on Friday morning, and Harry woke up knowing it the way he knew some things now, from the outside, from the general atmosphere of Hermione's anticipation, which was mixed. She was looking forward to it the way you look forward to a thing you expect to be bad at but are determined to approach correctly. He could feel the preparation in it, the set of her intention. The lesson was on the lawn, a gray October morning with just enough wind to make it interesting. The school broomsticks were lined up in the grass, old and clearly not recently maintained, several had visible twigs going the wrong direction, and Madame Hooch stood at the front with the authority of someone who genuinely did not care whether any of them were nervous. Stick out your right hand over your broom, she said, and say, up. Harry said, up, and his broom jumped into his hand immediately, which surprised him less than it should have, given the week. Around him, brooms were showing various degrees of reluctance. Ron's rolled over. Hermione's wobbled upright after 3 attempts and several increasingly determined repetitions, and when it finally came up her relief was immediate and replaced almost instantly by focus. Neville's broom didn't move at all. They mounted. They practiced rising and descending. Most of them managed the basics in the adequate, slightly terrifying way of total beginners. Neville Longbottom was clearly not built for this in the way some people are clearly not built for things, and no amount of instruction will change it, but he had the grim determination of someone who had decided not to be limited by facts. The broom went up. Neville went up with it, higher and higher, with a face that had moved from determination to horror. "Get down!" Hooch called. Neville shouted that he couldn't, which was demonstrably true. What happened next happened fast. The broom bucked. Neville lost his grip. He went sideways off the broom. There was a horrible suspended moment, the kind that time stretches around, and hit the ground. Harry was already moving before he thought about it, but Neville's wrist took the landing and everyone could hear the sound it made. Neville was pale and clearly not all right. Hooch took him to the hospital wing, telling everyone very firmly to keep their feet on the ground, and left. Draco Malfoy reached down and picked up something that had fallen from Neville's pocket when he landed. A small glass ball, filled with something that swirled like smoke, a remembrall. Harry thought, he'd heard Neville mention it was from his gran. Malfoy turned it over in his fingers with the particular care of someone who has no care at all. "Give that back," Harry said. He said it the way you say something that doesn't require a debate. Malfoy looked at him and then at Hermione, who was standing at Harry's shoulder, and something moved through Malfoy's face, the quick calculation of someone who has been raised to assess threats and opportunities simultaneously. "Why?" Malfoy said. "He dropped it." "He fell," Harry said. "Give it back." Malfoy looked at him for a moment. This was the moment, Harry understood, where most people back down, because Malfoy's default was to project an expectation of backing down so strong that most people complied by reflex. Harry looked back at him with the mild patience of someone who had been on the receiving end of this from Vernon Dursley and found it considerably less intimidating at boy height. Something in Malfoy recalibrated. He smiled instead. "Come and get it," he said, and mounted his broom. Harry mounted his broom. "Don't," Hermione said behind him. Madam Hooch said, "I know," he said. "Give me a minute." He kicked off. The moment he was in the air, the moment the ground dropped away and the wind hit him and the broom responded to his weight with the fluid, instinctive intelligence of something that was meant to be ridden, he understood why people loved Quidditch. Not the game, yet. Just this. This specific sensation of being suspended between falling and flying, of trusting your body to something that had been designed for exactly this. He went up. The air was cold and the sky was enormous above him and the grounds of Hogwarts spread below like something from a storybook, all green and grey and stone. Malfoy had gone up too, remembrall in hand, watching Harry with calculating amusement. Harry looked at him. Then he looked at the remembrall. Then, for no reason that a flight instructor would have approved of, he looked at the furthest window of the highest visible tower and made a decision. "Catch it if you can," Malfoy said, and threw the remembrall. Harry was already moving when it left Malfoy's hand. He didn't consciously plan the dive, or rather, the plan and the action were the same thing, a single motion from intention to execution with nothing between them. He pulled the broom nose down and went into a dive that made his eyes water, everything narrowing to the small glass ball falling and the wind and the speed, and he reached out, and he pulled up 10 inches from the ground. He was breathing hard. In his right hand, the remembrall sat, intact. There was a silence from the watching students that had the quality of an intake of breath. Behind him, from the ground, he could feel Hermione, not hear her, feel her. The emotion coming through the bond was multi-layered, fear that had just released, shading into relief, shading into something that wasn't quite admiration and wasn't quite exasperation and was very completely him. He looked up and found her. She was standing with her arms folded, and the look on her face was everything he'd felt from her. Show off, she said. Accurate, he said, and landed. McGonagall appeared 3 minutes later, materializing from the direction of the castle with the focused energy of someone who has received a report they did not expect to be good news. She looked at Harry for a long moment, and Harry looked back and prepared for any number of things. Come with me, she said. She took him to the 3rd floor, to a room where 3 people were sitting looking like they were in the middle of something important. Harry recognized Oliver Wood's name, the Gryffindor Quidditch captain, and understood what was happening before McGonagall had finished her explanation. I've never seen anything like it, she said, to Wood, with a controlled enthusiasm that was considerably more enthusiasm than Harry had seen from her so far. Natural ability like that, reminds me of someone I used to know. She looked at Harry again. We've found our new seeker. Harry didn't say anything. He felt, distantly, the bond, Hermione, somewhere in the castle, getting the general shape of his emotion, which was a very specific, quiet happiness. He thought, I've never had a thing that was mine before. Now I have too. The thought arrived at her somehow through the bond's weird permeable membrane, and what came back was warmth, clean and uncomplicated. He went back to the common room where Hermione and Ron were both waiting, and Ron was on his feet before Harry had finished coming through the portrait hole. McGonagall took you off to die, didn't she? Ron said. You're expelled. It's happened before. Seeker, Harry said. They've made me Seeker. Ron's face did something spectacular, moving through disbelief to genuine delight in about a second. First year. That hasn't happened in, I know, Harry said. Brilliant. That's properly brilliant, Harry. Thank you. He looked at Hermione. She had stayed sitting. She was watching him with an expression that was doing several things simultaneously, and the prominent thing was the same one he'd felt from the ground after the dive, not quite admiration, not quite exasperation, the unique emotional compound that he was beginning to associate specifically with her watching him do something she couldn't have predicted. It felt, he thought, like being seen. Congratulations, she said. You do understand the dive was objectively dangerous. I was fine the whole time. You couldn't have known that. I knew, he said, and stopped, because the truth was more complicated than confidence. He'd known the same way he'd caught the toad on the lake. The same way his matchstick had sharpened when he'd looked at her. Something in him, some deep, pre-irrational thing, had simply not allowed a version of events where he didn't pull up in time. He couldn't explain this yet. Hermione was watching him, and from the quality of her attention he could tell she'd felt the edges of the thought through the bond. She didn't push it. She filed it. You'll need to practice, she said instead. I know. I'll help, she said, in the tone of someone volunteering for a task they have no particular natural aptitude for but full intention of completing. You hate flying, Ron said, not unkindly. I dislike being bad at things, she corrected. I'll learn enough to be useful. She turned back to her book, conversation apparently concluded, but Harry could feel the thread of her focus still partially on him, the way a lamp keeps a room lit even when you're not looking at it. The thing was, he thought, sitting down across from her, they both understood that the seeker position was not simply a nice thing that had happened. Quidditch wasn't just a sport at Hogwarts. It was visibility, status, the kind of social currency that defined the Gryffindor experience. And Harry being visible was something that had always been inevitable, and also something that they both knew, without discussing it yet, would eventually attract attention beyond the Quidditch pitch. The bond hadn't made them powerful in any way that was yet obvious to anyone else. But it had made them something else, something harder to quantify, grounded. Harry moved through the week without the low-level anxiety of someone perpetually off balance, because there was always, at the edge of things, the faint warm signal of another person who was stable. Hermione functioned with an edge that she'd never had before, not knowledge exactly, she'd always had that, but confidence in action. The knowledge had always been there. The willingness to move had been slower in coming. They were changing each other. Slowly, in the way of water over stone, but certainly. On Saturday evening, Harry was reading by the common room fire when Neville came and sat near him. Neville was wearing a wrist brace from the hospital wing, and he had the general look of someone who had resigned himself to a world that was inconveniently larger than he'd been told. Harry liked Neville, genuinely. There was something in Neville's particular brand of determination, the determination of someone who kept going despite all available evidence suggesting he should stop, that Harry found deeply recognizable. "You all right?" Harry asked. "Mostly," Neville said. "Gran's going to be furious about the remembrall." "I've still got it," Harry said. He reached into his pocket. He'd pocketed it in the confusion after the dive and hadn't had a chance to return it. He handed it over. Neville took it, looking at it in his good hand. "Thank you." He looked at Harry with the cautious sincerity of someone who wasn't sure how to say a thing. "For getting it back. You didn't have to." "Yeah, I did," Harry said. Neville considered this. "Malfoy gives you that much trouble and you've been here a week. He'll give everyone trouble eventually. Better now while I know the shape of it." Neville blinked. Then something in his face shifted slightly, like a piece moving on a board. "You sound like you've thought about it." "I've had practice," Harry said, and left it at that. Neville nodded with the understanding of someone who had his own unspoken category of difficult experience and knew better than to ask about someone else's. They sat in a comfortable quiet for a few minutes. Harry went back to his reading. Neville turned the remembrall over in his fingers, watching it swirl. "It keeps going red," Neville said, mostly to himself. "I forget so many things." "Write them down," Harry suggested. Neville looked at him. "I mean it. Write down anything you're worried you'll forget. It doesn't fix the magic, but it helps." He paused. "At least you'll know where to look." Neville absorbed this with the gravity of someone for whom the advice was both practical and unexpectedly moving. "Right," he said. "Yeah. I'll do that." He pulled out a small notebook from somewhere. Harry noted that he already had one, and had simply forgotten about it, which was, Harry thought with the nearest thing to fondness he had words for, the most Neville thing possible. Hermione came back from the girls' dormitory at 9 with a different set of books and stopped when she saw Neville, assessed the situation in the 2-second scan Harry was learning was her default social calibration, and sat down in the chair beside him. "How's your wrist?" she asked. "Better," Neville said. "Madame Pomfrey gave me a potion." "Skill grow?" "I don't think so." "Something for swelling." "Deflammer tincture, probably." "It's quite effective." She opened her book, but kept her body turned toward the conversation, which was Hermione's version of "I'm here if you want to talk." Neville recognized it, in the way shy people recognize the specific quality of someone making space, and relaxed by a visible increment. Harry watched the two of them with the quiet pleasure of someone watching things go right, which was still, for him, a slightly unusual experience. He went back to his book. The fire was warm. The common room was full of the ordinary noise of people doing homework and arguing about it and occasionally accidentally setting something on fire. Ron was at a table in the corner losing chess to the twins with the baffled dignity of someone who kept thinking he was about to figure it out. Everything was, at this specific moment, fine. Harry was on page 30 of his Charms textbook when he became aware, at the edge of the bond's frequency, of something that wasn't Hermione's usual signal. Something different, a brief, cold blip, like a gap in static, followed by a wave of discomfort. He looked up. Hermione was still reading. She didn't look up. But her hand had stilled on the page. "What was that?" he asked quietly. She looked at him. She'd felt it too, he could see it in the brief stillness of her face. "I don't know," she said. "It didn't come from you." "No." She set down her book. "It wasn't the bond." "It was," she paused. "Adjacent to it." Like something near us that the bond noticed. Harry turned this over. Is that something it can do? Apparently, she said. She picked her book back up, but slowly. I'll look into it. She didn't find it that night. She didn't find it the next week either, buried as it was in texts that were incomplete and scholars who were working from even older sources than Eldrick's. What she eventually found, and what Harry had already half intuited, was that a soul bond at sufficient maturity developed a kind of peripheral sensitivity, an awareness not just of the bonded pair but of magical disturbances in their vicinity, specifically disturbances involving magic that was fundamentally hostile. What Harry had felt at the edge of the bond that Saturday evening was, they would eventually understand, Quirinus Quirrell passing through the corridor outside the Gryffindor portrait hole. What was on Quirinus Quirrell's soul, or rather what was pressed against it, a presence that was not Quirrell's own, cold and purposeful in the way of something that had been stripped of everything except intent, was something the bond had no category for and no name to give. But it noticed. It always noticed. They had no way of knowing that yet. The fire was warm. Neville was writing in his notebook. Ron lost another chess game and accused the twins of cheating, which they denied with the specific confidence of people who absolutely had. Hermione read. Harry read. And somewhere in the castle, in the corridors where torches threw long shadows and the stone held the cold of centuries, something that had once been the most feared name in the wizarding world began mapping its options with the patience of something that had already died once and had decided it would not do so twice. But that was later. That was next. For now, Harry turned a page, felt the steady warm signal of the bond at the edge of his awareness, and let himself have the simple present tense good thing of being exactly here. Chapter 3, the third-floor corridor. The troll smelled like something had died inside something that was also dying, and Harry was breathing through his mouth before he'd even fully registered what he was looking at. It was enormous. That was the first thing, the thing that made every other thought wait its turn. It filled the girls' bathroom the way furniture fills a room that's too small for it, not comfortably, but completely. 8 feet of gray-green muscle and matted hair, swinging a club the size of a small tree with the casual violence of something that had never once needed to be careful. The sinks were already rubble. 2 of the stall doors were matchwood. Water was spraying from a broken pipe and catching the torchlight, and the troll moved through it like weather. Hermione was backed against the far wall. She wasn't screaming. Harry had a half-second to note this, that she wasn't screaming, that she was pressed against the stone with her wand out even though her hand was shaking, and then the troll swung the club and he moved. He grabbed a stall door for leverage and vaulted onto the troll's back before he'd decided to. The troll lurched. Harry grabbed the thing's hair, coarse as wire, smelling catastrophic, and felt the world tilt as the troll registered his weight and began to thrash. "Do something," he shouted. "I'm thinking." Hermione shouted back. "Think faster." She did. Wingardium Leviosa. The club rose out of the troll's hand. The troll stared at it with the bafflement of something whose brain had just run out of framework. The club hung in the air for one perfect suspended second, Hermione's wand steady, her face set, the shaking in her hand entirely stopped, and then she released it. It came down on the troll's head with a sound like a very bad decision. The troll sat. Then it fell sideways with the inevitability of a large tree, and Harry jumped clear and landed in a roll through several inches of water and one piece of what had recently been a sink, and came up on his feet already turning to make sure Hermione was all right. She was standing with her wand still raised, breathing in sharp pulls, her robe soaked through, hair plastered to her face with water and something he wasn't going to examine closely. She was staring at the troll with an expression that was moving through several things in rapid succession: relief, adrenaline, something that looked like disbelief at herself, and then, settling, a sharp, clear satisfaction. "You're all right," Harry said. It wasn't a question. Yes. She lowered her wand. Raised it again immediately. Lowered it. "Yes," she said, more firmly. Behind them the door burst open and McGonagall arrived with Snape and Quirrell, who came in last and stood near the doorway with his turban and his nervous hands and his expression of someone who had not expected to be needed. McGonagall took in the scene: unconscious troll, destroyed bathroom, 2 soaking first years, Hermione's wand still in her hand, with the rapid visual processing of a woman who had seen a great many things in 40 years of teaching and was not going to let any of them see her surprised. "What on earth were you thinking?" she said, and the precision of her voice could have cut stone. Harry and Hermione exchanged a glance that contained an entire conversation. Ron, who had also come in at some point in the confusion and had done very little except watch with his mouth open, cleared his throat. It's my fault, Professor." His ears were red. "I went looking for Hermione to tell her about the troll, and she didn't know, and he trailed off, looking at the ceiling. I told her there was a troll and then I came to help when I should have just gone to get a teacher." McGonagall looked at Hermione, who was clearly evaluating this account against the true one and deciding. "Is that correct, Miss Granger?" Hermione looked at Ron with something complicated in her eyes. She was not, Harry knew from the bond's peripheral awareness, entirely comfortable with the lie, but she also understood what Ron had just done, which was absorb blame without being asked to. "More or less," she said. McGonagall took 5 points from Gryffindor, for being in the wrong place, which was fair, and gave the same to Harry for reckless endangerment of his person, which was also fair, and then she looked at Hermione for a moment and said, without elaborating, "Composure under pressure, Miss Granger." And left it there. Snape left without speaking. Harry watched him go and noted the way he moved, slightly stiff in one leg, which hadn't been there before, and gone before Harry could examine it further. He filed it. Quirrell bowed out last, murmuring something about the shock of it all, and Harry watched him go and felt, just at the edge of things, the same cold peripheral blip he'd felt in the common room weeks ago. Quick. Adjacent. Gone. He didn't say anything. He looked at Hermione. She was watching the door where Quirrell had been. She'd felt it too. They walked back to Gryffindor Tower in a cluster of 3, soaking wet, and nobody said much until they were through the portrait hole and into the warmth of the common room, where the fire had burned down to orange coals and most people had gone to bed. Ron dropped into a chair. Harry sat on the hearth rug. Hermione stayed standing, wringing water from her hair with the systematic efficiency of someone who had more important things to worry about but was doing this first. "Thank you," she said, to Ron. "For what you said to McGonagall." Ron shrugged, ears still red. "You'd have been expelled for it." "Probably. Seemed easier my way." Hermione wrung the last of the water from her hair, looked at it, and gave up. She sat cross-legged on the rug near Harry and said, "We need to talk about Professor Quirrell." Ron blinked. "What about him? When he came into the bathroom, did either of you feel anything?" Ron looked at her like she'd said something in a language he didn't speak. Harry looked at her sidelong. He was aware of the territory this was entering, the territory of the bond and its peripheral sensitivity, which was not something he and Hermione had explained to anyone, and which they both, without discussion at this precise moment, understood not to explain to Ron with a detailed account of their magical soul connection at 11 o'clock on the night of a troll attack. "Felt how?" Harry said carefully. "Like cold," Hermione said, equally careful. "Not temperature. Something else." Ron frowned. "I mean, Quirrell's generally a bit odd, isn't he? He smells like garlic and he's scared of his own shadow. I've never got a good feeling from divination and I know as much about it as my mum's garden gnomes, but there's something off about him." "Yes," Hermione said. "There is." "You think it was him?" Harry said. "The troll. I think it's worth asking who benefits from a troll wandering the corridors on Halloween." She pulled her knees to her chest, thinking. Everyone was at the feast. The castle is mostly empty. A troll loose in the dungeons creates chaos, gets everyone to their common rooms, and clears the third-floor corridor, Harry said. Hermione looked at him. Ron looked between them. Right, Ron said slowly. That corridor Dumbledore warned about. First day. Painful death and all that. Snape's leg, Harry said. Did you see it? When he left. He was favoring his left leg and it wasn't like that before the troll. So he went down the corridor, Hermione said. Tonight. Or tried to. Which means there's something down there he wanted, and the troll was either a coincidence or a distraction. She paused. I don't believe in coincidences on the scale of an 8-foot troll. Ron was quiet for a moment. This is the part where a sensible person says we should tell Dumbledore, he said. Yes, Hermione agreed. But you're not going to, are you? We don't know enough yet to tell him anything useful, Harry said. We know Quirrell's cold in a specific way and Snape went near the corridor tonight and there's something down there being guarded. That's 3 incomplete pieces. That's 3 pieces more than I'd like to have, Ron said, but he said it with the resignation of someone who had 6 older siblings and was familiar with being swept into things larger than him. They sat by the dying fire and talked until the coals went gray, and the thing Harry noticed was that the conversation felt, for the first time, like a group. Ron contributing in the quick reflex way of someone with good instincts and no system for them, Hermione providing the system, Harry moving between them and finding the points of synthesis. It worked. The 3 of them, in this configuration, worked in a way that Harry could feel but not quite articulate. He thought about the bond, about confluence and the synchronizing of magic, and wondered if what was happening between the 3 of them was something separate, something simpler, just 3 people who happened to complement each other being put under enough pressure to find it out. He thought it was probably both. Most things, he was learning, were both. They went to bed late and Hermione looked considerably more awake than anyone had a right to after fighting a troll, which was because she was already thinking, already turning the pieces over. Harry felt it even as he was falling asleep, the particular quality of her focus, sharper than usual, running on something beyond the ordinary. He fell asleep thinking about the 3rd-floor corridor, and cold, and Quirrell's nervous hands. The following week Hermione found him in the library on Tuesday afternoon with 4 new books and the expression of someone who has made a connection they've been building toward for a while. Fluffy, she said, dropping into the seat across from him. What? The thing behind the trapdoor on the 3rd floor. Hagrid has a dog, enormous, 3-headed, and he calls it Fluffy. I found references to 3-headed dogs as guardians in 2 different texts, and I asked Hagrid about his pets in a general way this morning and he mentioned Fluffy in passing and then got flustered and changed the subject, which means, he's guarding something, Harry said. And Hagrid knows what. And there's a trapdoor under Fluffy's feet, which means there's something below the dog. She spread her books. I've been cross-referencing the chocolate frog card, Nicholas Flamel, alchemist, only known maker of the Philosopher's Stone. Dumbledore helped him with something. The card notes it but doesn't specify. The stone is mentioned in the Hogwarts library in 2 places, both of which note its properties, unlimited gold production and an elixir of life. She looked at him directly. If Voldemort is somehow still, he is, Harry said. She nodded, accepting this without the flinch that most people produced around the name. Then what he would want most is a physical return. A body. And an elixir of life would be, she opened her hands. Everything. Everything he needs. And he'd need someone inside the school, Harry said. Someone with access. Quirrell, they said together. Right, said Ron, appearing from the stacks with a chess book under his arm, dropping into the 3rd chair with the easy familiarity of someone who had decided to stop being surprised by the conversations he was walking into. Quirrell's Voldemort's man. Are we doing this quietly or are we actually going to do something? Harry and Hermione looked at each other. Quietly, Harry said. For now. Merlin, Ron said. All right. What do we need to know? They began compiling. It became, over the following weeks, a secondary curriculum running underneath the official one, Ron mapping the castle's patterns, who went where and when, tracking Quirrell's movements with the natural surveillance instinct of someone raised in a large household where information was currency. Hermione building the theoretical framework, the what it means and the why it matters and the what would it take. Harry doing the thing he was beginning to understand, specifically built for, synthesizing, deciding, moving. The Quidditch season began. Practice 3 times a week on the pitch in the cold November evenings, Oliver Wood's voice a constant overhead commentary on positioning and speed and the basic philosophy of seeking, which boiled down to see it, get there first, don't die. Harry took to it with the specific joy of someone discovering that the thing they're best at is also the thing they love most. He was fast. Not just fast, precise. He'd come out of a dive at the last second and pull up cleanly, again and again, while Wood watched from the ground with an expression of barely contained professional ecstasy. His firebolt, no, the Nimbus 2000 that McGonagall had arranged, because he did not yet own a firebolt, moved like thought, like intention made physical. Hermione came to practice exactly twice, and each time she stood on the ground and watched with her arms folded and her assessment face on, and when Harry landed she gave him feedback that was both specific and accurate and came from someone who had clearly read every theoretical text on seeker performance that the library had to offer. It was not, strictly speaking, the same as having flown the patterns herself. It was also genuinely useful. You're anticipating the snitch's trajectory instead of reacting to it, she told him on the second visit. The texts say the best seekers track the movement before it resolves, which means relaxing the focus rather than intensifying it. Peripheral rather than central attention. The texts, Harry said, still breathing hard from the last drill, are frequently right, she finished, without apology. He tried it the next practice. It worked. Wood stared at him. What changed? Hermione told me to relax my focus, Harry said. Granger? She's been to practice twice. Once was enough, Harry said. Wood opened his mouth, closed it, and wrote something in his playbook. The first Quidditch match was Gryffindor versus Slytherin on a cold Saturday in November, and Harry stood on the pitch in the thin grey morning and felt the scale of it, the 3 hooped goalposts at each end, the stands filling with people, the sound of several hundred voices already building into something that had its own weather. He'd been in crowded places before. He'd never been the center of one. He looked up and found, in the Gryffindor stands, Hermione's face. She was seated between Ron and Neville. She was not shouting like the rest of the section. She was watching him with complete attention, clear-eyed, and when she caught his gaze she gave him the smallest possible nod. "You're ready," was what the nod said. He turned back to the pitch. The match started. Harry flew high, where the view was best, tracking the chaos below while keeping his awareness diffuse the way Hermione had told him, not searching for the snitch but remaining available to it. Wood was right, he was fast. When the Slytherin chaser tried a bludger feint he dodged it before fully registering the trajectory, his body making the decision independent of his conscious attention. The snitch appeared at 8 minutes, a flash of gold near the Slytherin end, and Harry was already moving before the thought completed. He drove the Nimbus forward, tucking flat against the handle, the air pressure pushing at his eyes and his robe streaming behind him, and the Slytherin seeker Terence Higgs saw it half a second later and gave chase. Harry had half a second. That was all he needed. He closed his fist around the snitch. The crowd did something that was no longer a crowd sound but a physical force, a wave of noise so immediate it was almost visible. Harry pulled up into clear air and opened his fist and the snitch spun in his palm, wings beating. The bond lit up with Hermione's reaction, clean, genuine, unheld, a brightness so sharp it was almost physical, and he laughed, actually laughed, which the nearest Gryffindor chaser heard and looked at him like he might have hit his head on the way down. He had not hit his head. He was just, for the first time in his life, straightforwardly happy. The celebrations in the common room that night went until Prefect Percy started making pointed remarks about bedtime. Ron was in full storytelling mode, describing the match to anyone who hadn't seen it and several people who had, with embellishments that became increasingly dramatic and which Harry was certain would eventually escape the confines of narrative accuracy. Neville was vibrating with second-hand excitement. Even some of the older students drifted over to congratulate Harry, including the twins, Fred and George Weasley, who moved like a unit and had opinions about everything, who both clapped him on the back and made competing claims about having always known he'd be a natural. Hermione sat in a corner with her current book and a cup of tea she'd somehow arranged to have, and she was reading, or appeared to be reading, but every few minutes she'd look up when someone said something interesting and her expression would do the thing that meant she was filing it. Harry dropped into the chair across from her when the crowd around him thinned. "Good book," he said. She turned it so he could see the spine. "Advanced Magical Theory, Resonance and Core Interaction." "The Bond," he said. "Stage 2, she said. "I think we're closer than I thought." She set the book down on her knee. "During the match, when you caught the snitch, I felt that. Not just your emotion. I felt the magic in it. The actual act of casting, or not casting exactly, but the active magic in your seeking." She said it carefully, like someone reporting something they want to be precise about. "It was yours. But it was brighter than usual. Like a signal with the volume up." "I felt you too," he said. "When you reacted." "I know. She looked at the book. Aldrich describes Stage 2 onset as the moment the cores begin actively harmonizing rather than passively coexisting. He says it usually happens during a moment of heightened magical action. She looked at him. "Catching the snitch counts, I think." "I think so too. Does it feel different?" He considered the question honestly. "It feels like the volume's up on everything," he said. "Not just you. Just everything." She absorbed this. That's consistent with what he describes. The amplification isn't selective. Our cores harmonizing means both cores are operating at higher resonance. She tapped her book. "Which has practical implications. For spells we cast together. For anything we do near each other. We may start producing magical effects beyond what either of us could achieve independently." She said this with the tone of someone who finds a situation both intellectually exciting and practically complicated. "Is that a problem?" "It'll be noticeable," she said. "To anyone who's paying attention." He looked at her. She looked at him. The fire was warm and the common room was loud around them and the bond hummed between them at its new, slightly higher frequency, and neither of them said the name of the person who was almost certainly already paying attention. "Let's go to the library tomorrow," Harry said. "I was going to suggest that," she said. "I know," he said. She closed the book with a quiet snap and said, "Stop doing that." "Doing what?" "Knowing things before I say them. It's unsettling. I can't help it." "I know," she said, and the slightest edge of a smile appeared. "It's equally unsettling when I do it." "Equally," he agreed. She picked up her tea, found it had gone cold, and put it down again with a mildly betrayed expression. Harry reached over and picked up her wand from the table beside her. She'd set it down when she sat, the way you set down a pen you're not using, and looked at it for a moment. It was vine wood and dragon heartstring, 10 3/4 inches. He'd learned this in passing and remembered it the way he remembered things about her, with a specificity that he was no longer surprised by. He handed it back to her. "Califations," he said, which was the warming charm they'd covered last week in Charms. She took the wand, looked at him with an expression that was briefly and genuinely startled. "You, try it," he said. She pointed it at the teacup. "Califations." The tea steamed. Immediately, evenly, with a precision that Flitwick would have found difficult to improve on. Hermione stared at it, then at her wand, then at Harry. I've never been able to do that cleanly," she said. "The warming charm is technically simple but the modulation is difficult. I keep overshooting." She looked at him. "What did you do?" "I'm not sure," Harry said. And he wasn't, exactly. He'd held her wand and thought about the charm and felt, in the bond, something align, something that was both of them and neither of them, a shared frequency that the wand had carried and then she'd cast through. He stopped. "Confluence," she said. "Quiet. Very precise. You use stage 3 before stage 2 is fully established." "Briefly," Harry said. She picked up her tea and drank it, and her face was doing the multi-layered thing where several different responses were happening simultaneously, and the one that came out on top was something close to wonder. "We should document this," she said. "Obviously," he said. "Don't say obviously." "Sorry." "Don't apologize when you're not sorry." Harry looked at her. She looked at him. The smile that neither of them was quite allowing happened anyway, present in the slight alteration of their expressions, two people sharing a private joke that wasn't quite a joke. "I'll get parchment," she said. She did, and they sat until midnight writing down what had happened with the tea, and Harry was not sorry about any of it. The defense against the dark arts classroom had a quality to it that Harry had been trying to name since September. It wasn't just the garlic, though the garlic was legendary, braided into curtains and draping off the ceiling in quantities that suggested Quirrell was either warding against something very specific or had a dietary eccentricity that had gotten out of hand. It was the temperature of the room. It was always slightly cold, independently of the season or the torches. And there was something about Quirrell himself, the stammer, the nervous hands, the turban, that had the quality of a performance that was going on longer than intended. Harry sat in defense class in the second week of December and watched Quirrell discuss vampire repellent with the patient attention of someone waiting for something to slip. The bond's peripheral sensitivity had been growing alongside their stage 2 development, and in Quirrell's presence it operated like a compass near a magnetic field, registering something nearby that it had no category for, something cold and purposeful and deeply at odds with the ordinary magic of the classroom. It wasn't Quirrell's magic. Harry was increasingly certain of that. Quirrell's magic was present but thin, the magic of someone competent but not particularly gifted. This other thing, this cold signal, was neither thin nor competent. It was something else. Something that knew exactly what it was and had no interest in concealment, not because it was careless but because it had decided that concealment was no longer necessary. After class Harry walked with Hermione to the library and said, without preamble, he doesn't stammer when he thinks no one's paying specific attention. Hermione looked at him. "I noticed that in October," she said. "The stammer disappears when he's focusing on something else." "Like what?" "Like directions. When he gives directions to the classroom, he doesn't stammer. When he's reprimanding someone, he doesn't stammer. The stammer is performed," Harry said. "Yes." They walked in silence for a moment. "The cold," Harry said. "What do you think it is?" She took a breath. She'd been thinking about this for a while, he could tell, the way he could always tell with her, from the quality of the silence she'd been keeping. "I think there's a second presence," she said. "In Quirrell. Not possession exactly. Possession in a full sense would leave more evidence, there are spells to detect it, teachers would have noticed. But something parasitic. Something that's using him as a," she paused. "A host. An anchor in the physical world." "Voldemort," Harry said. "I think so," she said. "Yes." "Right," Harry said. He held the door to the library. She went through. He followed, and the door swung shut behind them, and neither of them was afraid, which was notable. They should have been afraid. The information they were sitting on warranted fear, warranted the kind of freeze response that sensible people have when they understand that the most dangerous dark wizard in a century is possibly sharing the body of their defense against the dark arts professor. They were not afraid. They were, instead, thinking. "The stone is in the school," Harry said, sitting down. "Voldemort wants it. He's here to take it." The question is when. He'll move before the end of term, Hermione said. He'd want to move while everyone's at Christmas, minimal witnesses. Or, she stopped. What? He won't want to wait at all. Every day inside Quirrell is presumably, she was quiet for a moment, constructing something. If a soul fragment is using a living host, the host body isn't built for it. It would be deteriorating. He needs to move soon or Quirrell becomes too unstable to be useful. Harry thought about this. About urgency. About the specific pressure of something running out of time. We can't tell Dumbledore, he said. Harry, not yet. Think about it. He leaned forward. If we go to Dumbledore now and say we think Voldemort is living in Quirrell's head, what does he do? She thought. Investigates, she said. Which alerts Quirrell, who is almost certainly reporting everything to the piece of Voldemort in his head. And the piece of Voldemort in his head will accelerate. Move faster than planned, before whatever defense they have in place can be strengthened. Harry looked at the table. We need to know what's below the trapdoor. What we'd be dealing with. Not because I want to go down there, but because we need to know if Quirrell makes his move before Dumbledore does, Hermione finished. Yeah. She looked at him for a long moment. You're planning to stop him yourself. I'm planning to be able to stop him, Harry said. If it comes to that. That's the same thing. Is it? She pressed her lips together. When you put it that way, she said, it sounds less reckless than it is. Tell me it isn't reasonable. She couldn't. He watched her not be able to, watched her work through the logic and arrive at the same place he had, because they tended to, these days. The bond didn't make them think identically, she was still herself, rigorous and systematic and occasionally infuriating in the way of someone who was right about things she had every right to be right about, but it meant they'd both been operating on the same information, felt the same peripheral cold, developed the same sense of urgency. All right, she said finally. We research what's below the trapdoor. Carefully. Without going near it. And in January we can reassess. Agreed, Harry said. She opened her books. He opened his. Outside the library window, the first snow of the year was falling on the Hogwarts grounds, soft and indifferent, and the castle went on around them in its enormous ordinary way, full of people who had no idea what was in the building with them. That was, Harry thought, probably how it had always been. The world being dangerous whether people knew about it or not. The difference was that knowing gave you options. He turned a page. Hermione turned a page. The snow fell on. The bond hummed at its new frequency, warm and resonant, two young people who had found each other on a train in September and had been changed by something older than either of them, something patient and certain, something that had been waiting for exactly this. The castle held them. The magic held them. The danger held its own counsel and waited for its moment. But they were waiting too. And unlike what was waiting against them, they had the advantage of choosing when. Chapter 4, The Mirror and the Man. Christmas at Hogwarts was the kind of quiet that had texture to it. Most of the students had gone home by the 20th of December, and the castle didn't feel empty so much as revealed, the way a forest looks different in winter when the leaves are down and you can finally see the actual shape of the trees. The staircases moved more slowly, as if they'd decided not to bother being dramatic without an audience. The portraits talked more, long wandering conversations that crossed walls and corridors because there was nobody to interrupt them. The great hall went down to one table for meals, and the four longhouse tables stood empty and patient, and the remaining students clustered together in the middle of the hall and ate with the informal ease of people who had briefly stopped performing for anyone. Harry had stayed. Ron had stayed, which meant the Weasleys had stayed, which meant the common room was louder than it had any right to be for 12 people. Hermione had stayed too, which had surprised her parents on the phone. Harry had overheard the conversation from the common room, her voice carrying down the stairs with its particular mixture of authority and apology, and which had surprised nobody who knew her. She had books to read and questions to answer and a soul bond to document, and Christmas was, she had informed her parents, merely a logistical consideration. Her mother had apparently said something that made Hermione go quiet for a moment and then say, more gently, "I know, Mum. I miss you too. I'll be home at Easter." Harry had looked at the fire when she came back downstairs and not mentioned having heard, and she had sat down with her book and not mentioned that he'd heard, and that was that. Christmas morning arrived with snow on every windowsill and a small pile of presents at the foot of Harry's bed that was, by any reasonable measure, more than he'd received in the preceding 10 years combined. A wooden flute from Hagrid, clearly hand-carved with hands not built for fine work. A 50-pence piece from the Dursleys, which he looked at for a moment and then put on his bedside table with something that wasn't quite amusement and wasn't quite sadness. A jumper from Mrs. Weasley, bottle green, his size, with an H on the front, that was warm in the specific way of something made by someone who meant it. A box of chocolate frogs from Ron. And from Hermione, a book, Quidditch Through the Ages, which she had wrapped with perfect corners and a small card that said, in her neat handwriting, "I noticed you'd borrowed the library's copy twice. Now you don't have to give it back." Nothing else on the card. It didn't need anything else. He also received something he didn't expect. It was wrapped in plain brown paper, no card, no name. Inside was a cloak, the most extraordinary piece of fabric he'd ever touched, fluid in his hands like water, silver gray and weightless, giving off a faint shimmer that wasn't quite a color. He put it over himself and checked the mirror. He had no reflection below the neck. He turned to Ron, who had come in with a Weasley jumper of his own and a rather glazed expression from Christmas excitement. "Look at this," Harry said, putting the cloak over his head. Ron made a sound like someone who had accidentally swallowed their tea the wrong way. Harry pulled the cloak back off. There was no note. There was no explanation. There was something in the anonymity of it that felt significant in a way he couldn't yet parse. Hermione, who appeared in the doorway at this precise moment because her threshold for sleeping past 7 was firm regardless of the occasion, looked at the cloak. Then she looked at Harry. Then she looked at the cloak again with her research expression, the one where her eyes went slightly sharp at the corners. "May I?" she said. He held it out. She ran her fingers along the edge, and her breath caught in a very small way that only he would have noticed. "Disillusionment?" Ron said. "No," Hermione said. "Disillusionment is a spell. This is a..." She turned the fabric over, looking at the inside edge. "This is woven magic. This isn't something someone cast on fabric. This is what the fabric is." She folded it precisely and handed it back to Harry. "There are 3 known invisibility cloaks of this quality in documented wizarding history," she said. "Possibly fewer. The rest are enchanted garments that degrade." She looked at him with an expression he'd learned to read as "I have a theory that I'm not going to say yet because I don't have enough information." "Keep it safe," she said. "And don't use it carelessly." "I won't use it carelessly," Harry said. "You'll use it tonight," she said, with the certainty of someone who knew him. "Just, not carelessly." She was right. He used it that night. He hadn't intended to, exactly. He'd intended to look at it and think about it and possibly use it tomorrow. But the castle at night had a quality he'd been wanting to explore since September, the quality of itself, unperformed, the way it breathed when nobody was watching, and the cloak was an invitation he couldn't quite decline. He slipped out of the dormitory at 11:30, the cloak over his shoulders, and the castle received him like a secret. It was extraordinary. The corridors in torchlight, all deep shadow and orange warmth, the portraits murmuring at their own business, a ghost drifting through a wall with the peaceful purposelessness of someone on a long walk. Harry moved through it and felt the specific freedom of invisibility, not just the physical fact of being unseen but something broader, the freedom to be in a space without the space knowing who you were, without anyone constructing an expectation around your presence. He'd been Harry Potter all term, to varying degrees of intensity, from Ron's casual acceptance to Malfoy's pointed resentment to the general low-level awareness of the student body, and it was fine, it was all fine, but this was something different. This was just him, walking through a place that was already his in some way he couldn't fully explain. He went up. The third-floor corridor was dark and quiet, and Harry stood at the locked door and looked at it and felt through the door, in the bond's peripheral way, the distant presence beyond it. The three-headed dog, Fluffy, was breathing on the other side, slow and heavy, asleep or close to it. And below Fluffy, the trapdoor, and below that, whatever they'd been building their assessment around for 3 months. He didn't go through the door. He'd promised himself he wouldn't, not yet. He stood and looked at it and let himself understand the shape of the thing, not the details, just the shape. The proximity of it. The fact that it was here, real, no longer theoretical. Then he turned and walked the other direction and went up more stairs and around a corner he hadn't been around before and through a door that was unlocked because it didn't have a reason to be locked, and found himself in a long, high-ceilinged room he'd never seen. The room was empty except for the mirror. It stood against the far wall and it was enormous, taller than 2 men, with an ornate gold frame carved with words around the top that he had to tilt his head to read, Eris stra eru oit ube kafru oit on wosi. He looked at it without approaching. The mirror looked back. Even at a distance, something about it had the quality of a thing that wanted you to come closer. He went closer. His reflection looked back at him, but not only his reflection. Standing around him, in the mirror's silver surface, were people. A woman with green eyes and red hair who was smiling at him with an expression so specific and personal that his throat closed without warning. A man with dark hair and glasses, hand on the woman's shoulder, looking at Harry with the uncomplicated open pride of someone who had never doubted for a moment that he was allowed to be proud of his son. And others behind them, faces he didn't know but that his body seemed to, some atavistic recognition below the level of thought. His family. He stood in front of the mirror of Ariste for a long time, and it showed him what he desired most, and what he desired most was the simplest possible thing, the thing that 10 years in a cupboard had made fundamental, people who were his. After a while he sat down on the cold stone floor in front of the mirror and looked at his mother's face, because he could, because she was looking back, and he let himself have it. He went back the next night. He almost didn't, there was a small clear-eyed part of him that noted the pull of it as a warning, the way a current in water warns you about a pull before you're in it, but he went anyway, because he wasn't ready to leave his mother's face behind, and he told himself it was just one more night. On the 3rd night he went and Albus Dumbledore was already there. The headmaster was sitting in a chair that had not been in the room the previous 2 nights, positioned at an angle to the mirror, and he was watching Harry with an expression that was both gentle and entirely unsurprised. He had a pair of striped socks in his hands, apparently a gift he'd been unwrapping, and he set them aside with the unhurried ease of someone for whom being caught in the middle of something had ceased to be a meaningful category. "I thought you'd turn up again," Dumbledore said. Harry pulled the cloak off. There didn't seem to be a point in the alternative. "You've been here waiting." "I confess I have. The mirror tends to acquire visitors at this time of year." He looked at the mirror. "What do you see?" Harry looked at the mirror. His family looked back. He turned to Dumbledore and said, plainly, "My family. My parents." Dumbledore's face did something that was not quite a wince and was not quite grief and was both. "Yes," he said. "I thought it might be that." He looked at Harry with the kind and sharp eyes, and Harry looked back at him steadily. "Do you know what this mirror does, Harry?" "Shows you what you want most," Harry said. "The happiest man on earth would look in this mirror and see only himself," Dumbledore said. He said it with a gentleness that was real, Harry thought. Not performed gentleness. The genuine article. Men have wasted away before it, not knowing if what they see is real or even possible. It does not tell you how to get what you see. He paused. "I'm going to have it moved to a new home tomorrow. And I suggest that even if you were to stumble across it again, you resist the temptation to dwell on dreams. A beat. And forget to live. Harry looked at the mirror for one more moment. His mother's face. His father's hand. Then he looked at Dumbledore and said, "Can I ask you something?" "You may ask," Dumbledore said, which was not quite the same thing, and they both knew it. "What do you see when you look at it?" Dumbledore regarded him. There was something happening behind his eyes, something that was deciding, the way powerful people's thoughts are visible in their eyes for the people who know how to look. "I see myself holding a pair of thick woolly socks," he said mildly. Harry looked at him. Dumbledore looked back. "One can never have enough socks," Dumbledore added. "Right," Harry said. He picked up his cloak. He was fairly certain that wasn't true, in the specific sense that Dumbledore's answer was technically what he'd said but not what he meant, and they both understood this, and Dumbledore understood that Harry understood it. The exchange had the quality of something important happening in what wasn't said. "Good night, Harry," Dumbledore said. "Good night, Professor," Harry said, and left. He went back to Gryffindor Tower and climbed through the portrait hole and found Hermione sitting in front of the fire in her dressing gown and 2 blankets with a book open on her lap and a second cup of cold tea beside her. She looked up when he came in. "You went again," she said. "Last time," he said. She looked at his face. He saw her read it, the thing that had happened, the mirror, what he'd seen, not in specifics, not through the bond in that level of detail, but in the general quality of his expression, the particular set of something in him that was both resolved and raw. "Come and sit," she said. He sat on the floor beside her chair and leaned against it, and she adjusted her blanket without ceremony so one end of it covered his shoulder, an entirely practical gesture, and they sat together by the fire in the silent castle, and Harry said nothing about the mirror and she didn't ask. What she said, eventually, was, "I found something today." In an 1843 text about alchemical protections. Someone named Flammel, or someone in Flammel's circle, documented a series of magical challenges designed to guard an object from any single practitioner. She turned a page in her book, but she wasn't reading it. The challenges are referenced obliquely, but the pattern is clear. They're designed to be solvable, not impossible, but requiring specific knowledge or skill at each stage. Which means, they can be gotten past, Harry said. By someone who knew what they were facing, yes. She paused. "I think Quirrell knows. I think he's been working toward it all term and he's nearly there. The troll was an attempt that failed because of us. He'll try something else." "When?" "Before the end of the year," she said. "Before summer. He won't wait." Harry thought about the mirror. About desire, and what it cost. About Voldemort's desire, not complex desire, not the desire for family or warmth or belonging, but the stripped-down fundamental desire of something that had been reduced to pure want, unhoused by a body, sustained by whatever dark anchors it had managed to maintain. That kind of desire didn't wait. It couldn't afford to. "If he goes for the stone before we're ready," Harry said, "we go after him." "Yes," Hermione said. No hesitation. "Even if it means the trapdoor." "Even then." She looked at the fire. "I've been mapping the challenges. As much as I can from the references I've found." She picked up a sheet from beside her tea, she'd been writing, not reading, the book was a prop, and handed it to him. He looked at the list. It was partial, annotated with question marks where she'd run out of source material, but it was more than nothing. "You've been busy," he said. "It's Christmas," she said, as if this explained nothing, which it explained everything about her. He turned the sheet over. She'd written, in smaller text at the bottom, a note to herself, Stage 2 confirmed, amplification consistent in class settings. Proximity effects within approximate 10 feet. Check resonance under stress conditions. And below that, in even smaller text, as if she'd added it quickly and almost against her will, he went to the mirror 3 times. "He's all right." He didn't say anything about it. She didn't say anything about having written it. "All right," he said, handing the sheet back. "Tell me everything you know about alchemical protections." She told him, and they sat by the fire until the coals went orange and the cold crept in around the windows and the castle breathed around them, and at some point Ron came downstairs in his Weasley jumper looking for water and found them both asleep, Harry on the floor, Hermione in the chair with the blanket over them both, and went back upstairs with his water and the considered opinion that he was not going to say anything about this to anyone. January returned with cold and purpose. The term resumed, and with it the structured chaos of classes, and Harry moved through it with the specific sharpness of someone who was tracking two things simultaneously, the academic surface and the thing running underneath it, the game that Quirrell was playing with a hand that was not entirely his own. He watched Quirrell carefully, from appropriate distances, with the patience that years of keeping Vernon Dursley's moods in peripheral vision had built in him. He watched the moments when the stammer disappeared, when Quirrell spoke to Snape in a corridor and his voice went flat and clipped and entirely unlike the performance he maintained in class. He watched the way Quirrell moved through the castle after hours, never toward obvious destinations, always via routes that involved the third floor if he thought the corridors were clear. He watched Snape too, because Snape was not a simple element in this. His leg had healed over Christmas, which meant the injury from October, from whatever he'd encountered behind that door, had been worse than it looked. Snape spent time near the third-floor corridor. Snape's interest in the stone was not in question. But Snape's motivation, the part that Harry was still working through, was more complicated than Quirrell's. "I don't think Snape wants to give the stone to Voldemort," Harry said, in the library, one evening in February when this had been sitting in his mind for a while. Hermione looked up. "What makes you say that?" "He went through the trapdoor in October," Harry said. "Nobody asked him to. He did it because he wanted to assess the protections. And if he was working for Voldemort he'd have reported back and they'd have moved in October." He turned his quill over. "He's been blocking Quirrell." "Protecting the stone," Hermione said slowly. "Not for Dumbledore," Harry said. "For himself, maybe. Or for, I don't know, some other reason." He thought about the quality of cold he felt from Quirrell and the absence of any equivalent signal from Snape, who was cold in an entirely human way, the cold of someone who had chosen it. Whatever he's doing, he's not on Quirrell's side. "Two people after the same object from different directions," Hermione said. "And Dumbledore in the middle of it." She was quiet. "Does Dumbledore know about Quirrell?" "I think so," Harry said. "I think he knows more than he's let on to anyone, and he's watching and waiting because he thinks he can control the outcome." He paused. "I think he's wrong." Hermione put down her quill. This was significant. She put it down with the deliberateness of someone setting something aside to have a different kind of conversation. "He might not be wrong," she said. "He's extraordinarily powerful and he's been navigating things like this for decades." "He's also assumed Quirrell is the threat," Harry said. "He hasn't accounted for the fact that the threat is what's inside Quirrell. A soul fragment of Voldemort. The most powerful dark wizard in a century, surviving on the edge of existence, with nothing left to lose and everything to gain." He met her eyes. "Would you design your protections around that? Or around a professor who smells like garlic?" She was quiet for a moment. "Then, he designed them around the stone," she said. "Not the thief. The challenges are object-specific, not person-specific. Which means, they can be gotten past by anyone determined enough," Harry said. "Which we already knew." "Which means the protections are a delay, not a prevention," she said. "He's relying on being able to intervene before the delay runs out." She looked at Harry. "And if he's not here, he won't be," Harry said. "That's when it happens. When Dumbledore leaves." She looked at him steadily. "You're certain?" "I'm certain," he said. "Think about the timing. If Voldemort's going to move, he moves when the one person who can stop him is gone. And Dumbledore will be called away, he'll be made to be called away, through Quirrell or some other means, because Voldemort is not stupid and he knows who the obstacle is. The fire in the library grate crackled. Around them, 2 other students, older, Ravenclaw, entirely focused on their own work, moved between shelves. Everything ordinary. We should be ready, Hermione said. Not ready to go. Ready in case we have to. That's what I've been saying since October. I know, she said. I'm saying it now too. She pulled the challenge list from her bag and put it on the table between them. It had grown since Christmas, filled in with references she'd tracked across 4 different texts and a very productive conversation with Professor Sprout about Devil's Snare that had been conducted under the cover of a homework question and had, Harry thought, been genuinely impressive to watch. He looked at the list. Devil's Snare. Flying keys. A chessboard. Something involving potions. Something involving a mirror, potentially the mirror of Ariste, or something adjacent. And at least 2 others she had partial information about. This is winnable, Harry said. Not a question. Every single one, she said. With the right approach. She tapped the chess entry. This one's Ron's. Obviously, Harry said. Don't say, obviously, he said again. She looked at him. He looked back. The almost smile happened. The potions challenge, she said, picking up her quill again. That one's mine. Obviously, Harry said, for the 3rd time. She pressed her lips together against the smile. And the keys? Mine, he said. Flying keys, presumably moving fast. You need a seeker. Yes, she said. That's what I thought. She made a note. Looked at the list. The troll would have been an obvious candidate, but presumably it'll be unconscious already if the troll we encountered was the same one. Assuming Quirrell was practicing on it, Harry said. Which, yes, that's what I think. Neville appeared at the library door, looked around, found them, and came over with the specific energy of someone delivering news. He'd grown into the library over the past term, had discovered, with something like relief, that it was a place where being quietly present was acceptable and no one expected you to be loud or brave or immediately useful. Harry had started greeting him when he came in, and Neville had started sitting near them, and now he pulled out a chair without asking and set his books down and then looked at both of them with an expression that said he'd heard something. Quirrell, he said. I just passed him on the 3rd floor. He wasn't stammering. Harry and Hermione went still. He was talking to himself, Neville continued. Or, not to himself. To someone who wasn't there. He kept saying yes and not yet and it needs to be soon. He looked between them. I know I'm not meant to know whatever you 2 know. But I'm not an idiot. He said this with the measured confidence of someone who had been called an idiot at enough angles to have developed a precise counter-argument. And if something's happening, I'd rather know. Harry looked at Neville for a moment, and what he saw was what he'd been seeing all year, a boy who kept getting up. Who'd been sorted into Gryffindor for reasons that people kept underestimating because they were expecting the wrong kind of bravery. Sit down, Neville, Harry said. We'll tell you what we know. They told him. Not everything, they left the bond out of it entirely, left the peripheral sensitivity and stage 2 out of it, reduced it to the observable facts because those were damning enough on their own. Neville listened with the focused gravity of someone who takes things seriously, and when they finished he was quiet for a moment. What do we do? He said. We wait until we have to move, Harry said. And then we move. Neville nodded. He didn't ask if it was dangerous. They all knew it was dangerous, and the question would have been insulting to the fact that they'd all arrived at the same place by different routes and different kinds of courage. The weeks moved. March into April. The bond deepened in the quiet way of things that grow when they're not being watched, Harry and Hermione casting spells near each other and watching the results with the analytical calm of scientists who are pleased with their data, documenting effects that were beginning to exceed the Aldrich notes, approaching something that the older scholar had been cautious about, something he'd called resonance feedback, the point at which the synchronization becomes self-reinforcing. In Charms, Flitwick watched them during a group levitation exercise with an expression that moved through puzzlement to attention to something very close to recognition, and afterwards he asked them both to stay behind, and when the class had cleared he looked at them from his stack of books for a long silent moment. "Are you quite well?" he said, which was not what Harry expected. "Yes," they both said. "Good," Flitwick said. He looked at them over his glasses. "The work you're producing together, the amplification is visible to a trained observer. I don't imagine you intended that." He said it without judgment, with the curiosity of a very good teacher who has encountered something genuinely new. "I won't pry," he added. "But, be careful in Professor Snape's classes. He is a very trained observer." He let them go. They walked to dinner and didn't speak about it until they were seated and the noise of the great hall had built a wall around the conversation. "He knows," Hermione said. "He's not going to do anything about it," Harry said. "How do you know?" "Because his first question was whether we were all right," Harry said. "That's not the first question of someone who's going to report us." She thought about this. "He might tell Dumbledore." "Maybe," Harry said. "But that's a conversation between two very old men and whatever happens in it is not the same as Dumbledore directly intervening." He looked at the head table. Dumbledore was eating with the mild pleasure of someone who was also thinking about something else. His eyes swept the hall in the casual way of habit, and for a fraction of a second they found Harry's, and in that fraction there was something, not alarm, not warning, but something sharp and evaluating, the eyes of someone who was revising an estimate. Harry held the gaze for a moment, then looked at his plate. "He already knows," Harry said quietly. Hermione went still for a fraction of a second. "About the bond?" "About us," Harry said. "About what we are." "I don't know how much detail, but," he thought about Flitwick. "About the bond's signature, the magical resonance Aldrich had described, the marker that someone sensitive enough could detect. He's known for a while." "And he hasn't said anything," Hermione said. Her voice was very level, the level of someone keeping control of something. "No." She picked up her fork. "Set it down." "Why wouldn't he say anything?" "That's what I keep asking," Harry said. "And I keep coming back to the same answer." He looked at the head table again. Dumbledore was talking to McGonagall now, perfectly ordinary, a man who had been collecting information about Harry Potter since before Harry could speak. "He wants to see what we become before he decides what to do about us. We're not a variable in his calculation," Hermione said, quietly but with a precision that made it something other than a protest. "We're not," Harry agreed. "But he doesn't know that yet." The great hall moved around them, ordinary and enormous, and the year tilted toward its final chapter, and Harry and Hermione sat in the middle of everything they were and everything that was coming and looked at it clearly and were not afraid. That, more than anything, was what the bond had done. Not the magic, or not only the magic. Something more fundamental. Something about knowing there was a person beside you who was also looking at the thing clearly, who had looked at the evidence and reached their own conclusions and arrived at the same place you had, not because the bond told them to but because they were who they were. Harry looked at Hermione and she was looking at the head table, and the firelight from the wall sconces caught her face and she looked, he thought, exactly like what she was, someone who had decided. He looked away before she looked back. The fire kept going. The hall kept talking. Spring was coming, slow and certain, and with it the end of the year, and Harry could feel it coming the way you feel weather, not in the details yet, but in the pressure change, the quality of the air, the sense that something large is close. He was ready. Whatever that meant, whatever it cost, whatever it looked like at the end. He was ready. Chapter 5, Through the Trapdoor. Dumbledore left on a Tuesday. Harry knew it before the owls arrived. He was sitting in Charms when it happened, a shift in the quality of the day, subtle and immediate, like pressure change before a storm. He didn't consciously register it as Dumbledore leaving. He just knew that something that had been present in the background of the castle's atmosphere was gone, and the absence had a shape. He looked at Hermione. She was already looking at him. They said nothing. Flitwick was explaining switching spells at the front with his usual precise enthusiasm, and the class moved around them normally, and Harry turned back to his textbook and wrote 4 words in the margin of his notes: "Tonight. We need to go." He passed the parchment to Hermione. She read it. Wrote below, "Agreed. Tell Ron and Neville at lunch." He took the parchment back and looked at the words and felt the thing that the bond had been building toward all year settle into his bones with the clean weight of certainty. Not excitement, not dread. Just readiness. The readiness of something that has been growing toward a single moment and has finally arrived at it. Flitwick asked him a question. He answered it correctly. The class moved on. At lunch he sat between Ron and Hermione with Neville across from him and told them all 3 quietly, without drama, that it was tonight. Ron put down his fork and picked it back up and said nothing for a moment, which was his version of absorbing significant information. Neville went very still and then nodded once, the nod of someone who had been preparing for this and was glad the waiting was over. "Tonight," Ron said finally. "Right. What time?" "After dinner," Harry said. "When the corridors are clear. McGonagall does her rounds at 9:30, we go at 10. "Under the cloak," Hermione said. "All 4 of us, it'll be tight but it's possible." "It's possible," Harry confirmed. He'd tested it over the Easter holidays in an empty corridor. 4 people under the cloak of that quality was manageable if they moved carefully and nobody made sudden decisions about direction. "Right," Ron said again. He looked at his plate. Looked back up. "One of us might not come back from this." The table was quiet for a moment. "One of us might not," Harry said, because there was no point in lying about it, and he'd found that people handled hard truths better when they were offered plainly rather than wrapped in reassurance. "But we're all going and knowing what we're doing and why. That's different from stumbling into something." "Dead is dead regardless of whether you stumbled," Ron said. "It is," Harry agreed. "But going in prepared means we have the best possible chance. And I think our best is good enough." Ron looked at him for a moment with an expression that was difficult to read, something with several layers, and on top was the simple consideration of someone weighing odds, and underneath it was something more complicated that Harry didn't have time to examine right now. "All right," Ron said. "What do I need to do?" Harry told him. He told all 3 of them, clearly and specifically, what each of them would face based on Hermione's intelligence map of the challenges below. Ron's face changed when he heard what was waiting for him, the life-size chess match, changed in the specific way of someone who has been told that the thing they're best at is the thing that's needed, which is a feeling that has fear and pride simultaneously and resolves, usually, into seriousness. "Wizard's chess," Ron said. "I can do that." "I know you can," Harry said. "I'll need to sacrifice a piece," Ron said, thinking. "Possibly myself. Depending on the board." "Don't," Hermione said. "It might be necessary, it won't be," she said. "Because you're better than whoever designed the board, and whoever designed it didn't know you were coming." Ron looked at her. Something passed between them that was neither comfortable nor entirely uncomfortable, a moment of genuine recognition, the first clean one they'd had in a while, and then Ron sat back and said, "Yeah. All right." They went to afternoon classes. Harry sat through History of Magic, which was Binns and therefore a theoretical exercise in appearing present, and he spent it running through the challenge map in his mind, testing each element, looking for what Hermione's intelligence hadn't covered and what his instincts could fill in. The flying keys. He'd need speed and precision in a closed space, which was different from the open pitch, and the light would be different, and he didn't know how many keys or how they'd move. He filed this under Adapt on site. The Potions Challenge. That was Hermione's, fully and completely. She'd identified the puzzle type from the 1843 text, a logic problem with 7 bottles, and she'd been working the permutations for 3 weeks. She would solve it. He had no doubt about this at all, in the specific way that you don't doubt the sun rising, not because you're naive but because you know the mechanism well enough to trust it. After History of Magic he walked back toward the tower and Hermione fell into step beside him in the corridor and they walked in the comfortable silence they'd developed over the year, the silence that wasn't absence of communication, and she said quietly, "If something goes wrong, it won't," he said. "I know, but if it does, Hermione." She stopped walking. He stopped too. The corridor was empty, another class period about to start, everyone else in motion somewhere else, and she looked at him with her expression fully open in the way it only went when she decided that precision mattered more than composure. "I'm not afraid," she said. "I want you to know that. I'm not. I've thought about it, and I know what might happen, and I'm not afraid." He looked at her for a moment. "I know," he said. "I just wanted to say it out loud," she said. "I know," he said again, and the thing in the bond was warm and quiet and steady. "Me too." She held his gaze for another second, then nodded, as if something had been confirmed to her own satisfaction, and they walked back to the tower together. After dinner, they went up to the dormitory and Harry checked the cloak and his wand and stood at the window for a moment looking at the grounds. The sun was going down over the lake in long orange strips, the sky at the edge of the world going dark blue, and Hogwarts was going into its evening configuration around him. He could feel the castle the way he'd been feeling it all year, with the specific sensitivity that had developed in him alongside the bond, and what the castle felt like tonight was alert. Ready. Like it was also paying attention. He thought that was probably his imagination. He was not entirely sure. At 10 o'clock they gathered in the common room. Percy had done his rounds and gone to bed and most of Gryffindor was upstairs, and the common room had its late evening quality, a couple of fifth years studying, one second year who'd fallen asleep over a textbook. Harry, Hermione, Ron, and Neville stood near the portrait hole and looked at each other. "Wands out," Harry said, and drew his. "And keep them out the entire time. No exceptions." They went under the cloak. It was very close. For bodies under even a large invisibility cloak meant moving carefully, staying in step, which was its own odd intimacy, the 4 of them synchronized by necessity, each person's movement requiring adjustment from the others. Harry led. Hermione was at his left shoulder. Ron and Neville behind them. The castle was quiet. Peeves was somewhere distant, rattling things in a corridor 3 floors down, a useful diversion that required none of their engineering. They made the 3rd floor in 8 minutes, moving fast and silently, and Harry stopped outside the locked door and drew the cloak off them. 4 people, 4 wands, the door between them and what was next. "Alohomora," Hermione said, and the lock clicked open. Harry pushed the door. Fluffy was asleep. But it was not a natural sleep. The enormous 3-headed dog was arranged on the trapdoor with the stillness of something chemically managed, all 3 heads down, breathing with the deep unconscious rhythm of an animal that had no idea it was asleep. Beside one of its enormous paws, a small golden harp was playing itself. Harry looked at it and thought, with a quick cold clarity, Quirrell was here first. He was already through the trapdoor. Already on his way. "He's ahead of us," Harry said. "How far ahead?" Ron said. "Tonight. Minutes to an hour." Harry crouched by the trapdoor and pulled it open. Dark below. No way to see how far the drop was. He looked at Hermione. "Devil's snare," she said. "It'll catch us. Don't fight it." He went in. The fall lasted long enough to be genuinely alarming and ended in something that was soft and alive, thin, tendril-like, wrapping around him immediately with the insistent grip of something that wanted to hold on. He felt it against his arms, his legs, and understood immediately what Hermione had said. "Don't fight it." He went still, completely still, and let his body relax into the grip, and felt the tendrils slow and begin to loosen in the way of something that responds to resistance, not to stillness. The others landed around him. Ron yelped and started pulling at the vines, and Harry said, "Ron. Stop moving. Sharp, immediate." Ron stopped. The vines loosened on all of them, and they sank slowly through the plant and dropped to solid ground. Hermione was already casting. "Lumos Solum," she said, and the wand threw a shaft of brilliant sunlight directly into the devil's snare above them, and the plant recoiled with a sound like a hiss and cleared the exit completely. She looked up at her own work with the expression of someone for whom things going exactly as calculated is still briefly satisfying. "That was brilliant," Neville said, slightly breathless. "It was textbook," she said, "but there was a warmth in it." They ran. The next chamber opened ahead of them with the sound of something first heard as wind and resolved into wings, and Harry came through the door and stopped and looked at what was in the room. The ceiling was alive with winged keys, hundreds of them, diving and swooping and catching the torchlight on their feathers and their old-fashioned metal frames, a flock of enchanted locks all in constant motion. In the center of the room, a broomstick. And on the far side, a locked door. Harry looked at the door. Then at the keys. He picked up the broomstick. "It'll be old," Hermione said, studying the keys in the air. "The right key, it'll have been used recently, the wings will show where." "Look for," Harry was already in the air. He didn't need to think about it in the way that needed explaining. He just flew up into the cloud of keys and felt the immediate familiar shift of perception that happened when he was on a broom, everything else going quiet, his vision going wide and clear, his body calibrating to the three-dimensional space the way it had been doing since October. The keys moved around him in every direction, and he stopped looking for the right one individually and let his vision go soft and wide the way Hermione had told him, peripheral rather than central, and, there. A silver key with a bent wing, moving faster than the others because it knew, because whatever enchantment lived in it knew it was being sought, and Harry went after it the way he went after the snitch, not predicting, not planning, just flowing behind it with the relentless patient acceleration of a body that had been made for exactly this. The key dove. Harry dove. The key jinked left. Harry was already left. The key tried for the ceiling, and Harry came up under it with his hand already extended and closed his fingers around cold metal and wings. He came back down. He held up the key. Hermione had it in the lock before he'd fully landed, and the door swung open. The chess room. It was enormous. The ceiling was lost in darkness, and the chess pieces were the size of horses, and the board stretched the length of a Quidditch pitch, black and white and silent, waiting. On the far side of the board, the exit. Between them and it, every square a potential conflict and every piece a potential casualty. Ron stepped forward and looked at the board with the focused stillness of a different person, not the cheerful, slightly scattered boy from the common room, but someone who looked at a complex problem and went entirely quiet inside it. He walked slowly along their side of the board, examining pieces, and nobody said anything because his silence had authority in it. "Take your positions," he said. He placed them. Harry as a bishop. Hermione as a rook. Neville as a castle. Ron himself as a knight, climbing onto a horse that was enormous and stone-cold and moved with the grinding inevitability of something that had been waiting for a player worth following. The pieces moved. The black pieces advanced, and Ron called responses with the clipped precision of someone several moves ahead, and Harry moved when told and watched the board from his bishop's perspective and trusted Ron completely. He was aware of Hermione beside him, the bond warm and steady, and he was aware that both of them were trusting Ron in a way that required actual faith, which was different from calculation. A knight went down. 2 pawns taken. The battle chess sounds of stone against stone and pieces shattering were enormous in the dark room, and Harry flinched and kept moving and watched Ron's face, which was entirely calm. Then Ron looked at the board and went still with a different quality, the stillness of someone who has found the answer and understood the cost simultaneously. "There," he said. He pointed to a square. I move there, it's checkmate in 3. He looked at Harry. It'll take me out. The Queen will take me. Don't, Neville said immediately. Someone has to, it doesn't have to be you, Hermione said. Her voice was level but there was something underneath it. It does, Ron said. I'm the knight. The knight goes there. He looked at Harry. Not a question. An answer he'd already given himself, presented for acknowledgement. Harry looked at him for a moment. Ron was, in this moment, on this board, completely himself. Not trying to be something, not performing anything. Just a boy who was very good at one thing and had found the moment when that thing mattered completely. You're sure, Harry said. I'm sure, Ron said. You two go. Go fast. He looked at Neville. Neville stays with me in case I need help. Neville nodded, with a set to his jaw that was its own answer about whether he'd be useful. Ron moved his knight. The Queen came. Harry saw it happening and looked away, looked forward, grabbed Hermione's arm and they ran for the door on the far side of the board erupting around them as the chess logic resolved, pieces moving in all directions, and behind them there was a crash and a sound that made Hermione flinch and grip Harry's arm back, and he pulled them through the door and pulled it shut and the sound was cut off. They stopped. Hermione's hand was still on his arm. She was breathing hard. Is he, Neville's with him, Harry said. He's all right. He didn't know this with absolute certainty. He said it because it was the most likely thing and because the alternative wasn't useful to them right now. She released his arm. They looked at the next chamber. The troll was already unconscious. Mountain troll, 12 feet if it was an inch, face down on the stone floor with the stillness of something that had been handled recently and efficiently. Neither of them commented. They stepped around it and went through the next door. The potions room was smaller than the others and darker, lit only by a fire on each side, purple flames behind them, black flames ahead, both of them burning without fuel, both of them extremely permanent looking. On a table in the center, 7 bottles of varying sizes, arranged like chess pieces of a different kind, and a rolled piece of parchment. Hermione went straight to the table. Harry stayed near the door and watched her work, which was the right allocation of attention because he was not going to improve on whatever she was about to do and she needed the space. She unrolled the parchment, read it once, read it again, put it down. She looked at the bottles. Her lips moved slightly, the way they did when she was working through something that required all her processing power, and Harry watched her face and didn't say a word. It's a logic puzzle, she said. Not a magical test. Purely logic. She sounded both impressed and wry. Which means most wizards would be completely stuck, because wizards don't study formal logic. But you do, Harry said. Obviously. She pointed to the bottles in order, not touching them. 7. 3 are poison. 2 are wine, which are useless. 1 will allow safe passage through the black flames, 1 will allow retreat through the purple. She worked through it as she spoke, cross-referencing, eliminating, and Harry watched the confidence with which she moved through the reasoning and thought that this, exactly this, Hermione at work on a problem she was built for, was one of the things he was most certain about in the world. That one, she said, pointing to a small bottle at the end. For you. Forward through the black flames. She picked up the second smallest. This one for me to go back. You're not coming forward, Harry said. She looked at him. Harry, there's only enough in that bottle for 1 person, he said. He wasn't guessing, he could see the volume. And what's ahead is, he stopped. It's Voldemort, Hermione. Whatever's left of him. I need to be the one who goes. I'm aware of that, she said. I'm also aware that you're walking into a room with the most powerful dark wizard in history and I'd prefer not to wait on the other side of a fire. I need you on the other side, he said. I need you to get Ron to the hospital wing and send an owl to Dumbledore and make sure someone knows what happened here regardless of what happens to me." He held her gaze. "You know I'm right." She looked at him for a long time. Through the bond he could feel what she was feeling with unusual clarity, fear that was not for herself, a fierce reluctant recognition that he was right, and underneath both of those something older and quieter that had no name yet but was warm and certain. She pressed her lips together and looked at the small bottle in her hand and back at him. "Come back," she said. "Flat. Factual. Non-negotiable." "That's the plan," he said. "It's not a plan, it's an intention. I want an actual plan. I go in, I find out what I'm dealing with, I use every advantage I have." He took the small bottle from the table. "I'm not going in to die, Hermione. I'm going in to win." She looked at him, and whatever assessment she ran completed itself, and she handed him the bottle. Her fingers brushed his when she did it, a brief, deliberate contact, and through the bond it was like touching a live wire, the resonance between them spiking at stage 2 intensity, warm and enormous, the kind of warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. She stepped back. Her chin was up, the posture of someone doing the hard thing rather than the preferred thing. He thought she was extraordinary. He thought he'd tell her that when this was over. "Go," she said. He went. He drank the potion. Cold as ice going down, clarifying in the way of something that cuts away what's unnecessary. He stepped through the black flames. The fire didn't burn. He was through. The final chamber was circular and lit by torchlight that came from no obvious source, and in the center of it stood the mirror of Eriste. Harry looked at it and understood immediately. He understood why it was here, what it was doing here, what Dumbledore had designed it to do. He walked toward it and looked into it. His reflection looked back at him, alone, and in his reflection's hand, the Philosopher's Stone. He felt the weight of it in his actual pocket simultaneously. He almost laughed. Clever. Genuinely clever. You could only get the stone from the mirror if you wanted to find it rather than use it, and that singular elegance was Dumbledore all over, the architecture of a very specific kind of genius. Then Quirrell stepped out of the shadows. He was different. Harry had been watching Quirrell for 8 months and the performance was gone, the stammer, the nervous hands, the carefully maintained frailty. What stood here was something else, upright and cold-eyed, and when he spoke his voice was flat and carrying and nothing like the classroom voice. "Well done, Potter," he said. "I wasn't certain you'd make it this far." He didn't say it with surprise. He said it with the evaluating calm of someone revising their assessment upward by a calculated amount. "You were ahead of us," Harry said. He was looking at Quirrell's face and feeling, through the bond's peripheral sensitivity, the cold signal he'd been cataloging all year, sharper now, immediate, not adjacent but here. The presence behind Quirrell's eyes was paying full attention. Not by much. Enough. Quirrell raised his wand. "Give me the stone." Harry felt the stone in his pocket. He didn't reach for it. He stood in front of the mirror and looked at Quirrell, at the man, at what was using the man, and did the thing he'd been doing since he was 7 years old when Vernon Dursley loomed over him. He assessed it clearly and found it, in the final analysis, not quite as frightening as it wanted to be. "No," Harry said. Quirrell's wand arm didn't move. "You can't fight me," he said. "You're 11 years old." "I can," Harry said. "And you know that or you wouldn't have spent 8 months trying to ensure I didn't find out what you were doing." Something flickered in Quirrell's expression. The cold presence behind his eyes shifted, not retreat, but reorientation, the attention of something that has been thinking about Harry Potter for a long time refocusing with the specific sharpness of a direct encounter. "The boy lives," said a voice that was not Quirrell's. It came from everywhere and nowhere. It came from inside the stone walls. It came from inside Harry's own skull, resonating with the scar, which lit up with pain so immediate and total that for a half-second Harry went white inside. He stayed standing. "The mark I made on you is still there," the voice said. And it was not Quirrell speaking. Quirrell's lips were moving, but the voice was something else, something that had no body of its own and was using the only available apparatus. "I can feel it from here. All these years and it persists." A pause that felt like evaluation. "You are more than I expected." "Most people are," Harry said, through the pain. Quirrell made a gesture and Harry's arms locked to his sides, a full-body binding that didn't use a spell name but didn't need one, raw power, directed, the kind that came from something that had been doing this for decades before Harry was born. Harry felt the constraint and assessed it and felt, in the bond, the sudden spike of Hermione's alarm on the other side of the black flames. She'd felt the binding through the bond, felt his pain through the bond, and he felt her fighting the instinct to come through the fire. "I'm all right," he thought, with the specific intention of the bond. He didn't know if it could carry that level of directional communication yet. He focused everything he had on sending it clearly. The alarm in the bond didn't stop, but it steadied. She stayed. "Give me the stone," Quirrell said, in his own voice. "Or what I do next will be considerably less comfortable than that." Harry looked at him. The binding held his arms, but his mind was completely clear, and what his mind was doing was working through every piece of information he had about what he was looking at and what could be used. The bond hummed at its stage 2 frequency, warm and present, and he thought about Aldrich's notes and the description of confluence, stage 3, the ability to draw on each other's reserves, and he thought about the cup of tea in the common room and Hermione's wand and something aligning. He thought about Hermione's voice saying califations and the warmth moving through the wand. He thought about the scar on his forehead and his mother's magic and what Hermione had said on the train about residual signatures and what Dumbledore hadn't answered about what he saw in the mirror. He thought about 10 years in a cupboard and the freedom of the Hogwarts Express and the way Hermione had reached out with a researcher's honest curiosity and touched his forehead. He stopped thinking. He pulled. He pulled on the bond the way you pull on a rope when you know someone else is holding the other end. Not Hermione's consciousness, he wasn't reaching for that, wasn't reaching for her, but the frequency they shared, the resonance that was both of them and neither, the third thing that the ancient magic had made between two people who complemented each other perfectly, that pre-rational presence that had looked at them on a train and said yes. He felt it answer. The warmth hit him like a second heartbeat, enormous and steady, and it amplified what he had, amplified the magic that lived in the scar and in his blood and in whatever his mother had put there on the night she died, and the binding shattered. Quirrell flinched. Not a small flinch, a full-body recoil, the recoil of something that had felt what Harry had just done and had not expected it. "What was that?" said the voice that was not Quirrell. "Something old," Harry said, and crossed the distance between them and grabbed Quirrell's wrist. The effect was not something Harry had planned. He hadn't planned any of this, there was no plan beyond move, act, decide, but the moment he made contact with Quirrell's skin, the thing that had been in the back of his awareness all year, the cold signal, the parasitic presence, met the warmth that was flooding through him from the bond and from the magic in his scar and from everything his mother had left him. It burned. Not Harry. Quirrell. The man screamed, a raw and genuine sound of pain that had nothing of performance in it, and his skin where Harry gripped it was blistering, actually blistering, the magic pushing through the contact and searing whatever it touched, and Harry held on because he could feel that the thing inside Quirrell was trying to leave, trying to detach, trying to evacuate the host before the damage became permanent. "Let it go," Harry said, to Quirrell. To the man. "Just let it go. You don't have to keep doing this." Quirrell's face looked at him with two separate expressions running on the same features, one was agony, and one, underneath it, was something that might have been relief. "He has always," Quirrell said, in his own voice, through the pain, the stammer gone completely. "He has always been too much to hold." Then the cold presence inside him gathered itself and pulled out. It came apart in the room like smoke in wind, a tearing sensation that Harry felt through the scar with a bright bolt of pain that knocked him backward, and Quirrell collapsed like a puppet with its strings cut, and for a moment the room was full of a cold black presence that had no body and no anchor and nowhere to go. Harry looked at it. He felt the bond, steady and warm. He felt the magic in the scar, his mother's magic, the oldest protection in the world. He felt the stone in his pocket, solid and real. The cold presence looked back at him with whatever it used instead of eyes. "This isn't over," it said. Not in sound. In something older than sound, something the scar received directly. "No," Harry said. "But it's over tonight." He felt the presence leave, not destroyed, not killed, nothing so clean as that. Dispersed. Returned to whatever minimal state of non-being it could maintain without a host or an anchor. The room went 10 degrees warmer immediately, the way a room goes warm when a window is closed. Harry stood in the circular room with the mirror of Eriste and Quirrell's unconscious body and the stone in his pocket and his own breathing, which was harder than he'd expected, and his scar, which ached with the deep bone-level ache of something that had been under significant stress. He looked at the mirror. His reflection looked back, just his reflection now, nobody else, no family arranged behind him. Just Harry, slightly battered, entirely present. He put his hand over his pocket where the stone was. Then the black flames behind him guttered and someone came through them. He turned. Hermione stood on the other side of the room with her wand raised and her eyes going rapidly from the unconscious Quirrell to the mirror to Harry, and the expression on her face was doing 4 things at once, and the most prominent one was a relief so complete it was almost structural, like a building finding its foundation. "I told you to stay," he said. "You pulled on the bond," she said, her voice very controlled. "I felt you, I felt all of it. I wasn't going to stay on the other side of a fire while you—" She stopped. Looked at Quirrell. Looked at Harry. "Are you hurt?" "My scar," he said. "It's manageable." She crossed the room. She didn't ask permission, she reached up and pushed his fringe back, the same motion as on the train, and looked at the scar. It was not bleeding. It was red, and warm to the touch. She confirmed with 2 fingers pressed lightly against it, and she looked at it with the furious focused attention of someone who needs to confirm something before they can stand down. "It's all right," he said. "I know," she said, but she kept her fingers there for another moment. Through the bond, in the direct clear way that high emotional states produced, he felt everything she was feeling, and it was warm and frightened and relieved and something else that had no name yet in either of their vocabularies, the warm unnamed thing that had been building since September. Her fingers dropped. She stepped back. The stone? He took it out. Small, red, heavier than it looked. He held it out and she looked at it and he looked at it and neither of them said the obvious thing about what it would have meant if they'd been a minute slower. "We need to get out," she said. Ron first," Harry agreed. "Can you walk?" "I can run," he said, and she looked at him with the expression that was not quite admiration and not quite exasperation, and then she nodded and they ran. Back through the black flames, together this time, the potion's protection extended by whatever the bond was doing at this level of resonance, both of them through cleanly, back through the potion room, back through the now motionless chest chamber where Ron was sitting against a wall with a gash on his forehead and Neville crouched next to him with a worried expression that resolved into relief so fierce it was almost visible from across the room. "You're alive," Ron said, like he'd been running the statistics and had not been fully confident. "We're alive," Harry said. "Can you walk?" "I can walk," Ron said, and proved it by getting to his feet with only moderate assistance from Neville. He looked at Harry's face and then at Hermione's and then at Harry's again. "You got it?" Harry held up the stone. Ron stared at it. Then he laughed, a short, genuine, slightly hysterical laugh, the laugh of someone whose adrenaline had nowhere left to go. "Merlin," he said. "Brilliant. That's absolutely," he shook his head. "Right. Let's go before anything else tries to kill us." They went up through the trapdoor. Fluffy was still asleep, unaware of everything that had happened beneath it. They climbed out, and Harry pulled the trapdoor shut, and the four of them stood in the third-floor corridor, and the castle was quiet around them, and outside the windows the sky was beginning to go the pale grey of early morning. Harry looked at the stone in his hand. Then he put it in his pocket. "I'm going to Dumbledore's office," he said. "Regardless of whether he's back yet." "I'll send the owl," Hermione said. She had a composed look that was very slightly frayed at the edges. "And then I'm taking Ron to Madame Pomfrey." "I don't need," Ron started. "You have a head wound and you were knocked off a stone horse," she said. "You need." Ron decided not to continue this argument. Neville was looking at Harry with an expression of someone who had been through something significant and was still processing the scale of it. "Is it over?" he said. "Tonight, is it actually over?" Harry thought about the cold presence leaving the room. The dispersal. The "this isn't over" that had come through the scar. "Tonight," he said. "Yes. Completely." Neville nodded, and the relief in his face was deep and genuine, and Harry thought again what he'd been thinking all year, that Neville Longbottom had a kind of bravery that people kept mistaking for something lesser because it didn't perform. "Thank you," Harry said. "All three of you. Specifically and genuinely, thank you." Ron looked at his shoes. Neville looked at the ceiling. Hermione looked at Harry with the specific look of someone receiving something they're not entirely sure how to hold. "Go," she said, to Harry, and the word had everything in it. "Go to Dumbledore, go do what needs to be done, go because you're the one it needs to be, and also come back, and also I'll be there when you do." He went. Chapter 6. What was declared Dumbledore's office smelled like something between old books and burnt sugar, and was occupied, when Harry arrived, by approximately 35 years' worth of accumulated objects that had no obvious organizing principle beyond interesting, and a phoenix that sat on a golden perch and looked at Harry with the calm amber eyes of something that had died and come back enough times to have perspective. Harry stood in the middle of the room and waited. He'd been waiting for approximately 4 minutes when the door behind the desk opened and Dumbledore came through it, still wearing traveling robes, carrying a letter in one hand and stopping when he saw Harry with the expression of someone whose calculation has just been revised by a significant variable. They looked at each other across the circular room. "Harry," Dumbledore said. "Professor." Harry reached into his pocket and set the Philosopher's Stone on the desk between them. It sat there in the candlelight, red and quiet, approximately the weight of everything that had almost gone wrong. Dumbledore looked at it. His face did something complicated, not surprise, because he'd been beyond surprise for decades, but something that sat in surprise's neighborhood. He set down his letter and his traveling cloak and lowered himself into his chair and looked at the stone for a moment before looking at Harry. "Sit down," he said. Harry sat. "Tell me," Dumbledore said. Harry told him. He did it efficiently and in order, starting with Quirrell through the trapdoor and ending with the circular room and what had happened when he'd grabbed Quirrell's wrist, and he left nothing out that was relevant and some things out that were not. He did not, specifically, explain in detail the mechanism by which he'd shattered the binding. He described it as pulling on his own magical reserves under extreme stress, which was accurate as far as it went, and Dumbledore listened to the whole account with the focused attention of someone who is simultaneously processing and evaluating, and when Harry finished there was a silence that was itself a kind of communication. "Quirrell?" Dumbledore said. "Unconscious in the chamber," Harry said. "I don't know his condition." Dumbledore made a small gesture and the phoenix, Fawkes, Harry would learn later, rose from his perch and left through the window with the unhurried grace of something on a specific errand. Dumbledore watched him go, then turned back to Harry. "You broke a binding cast by Voldemort," Dumbledore said. "Not a question. Stated precisely, the way you state coordinates." "Yes." "Through what mechanism?" Harry met the blue eyes, very kind, very sharp, the eyes he'd been looking at all year and assessing. He thought about what Hermione had said in February, were not a variable in his calculation. He thought about what he'd said back, he doesn't know that yet. "I'm not entirely sure," Harry said. Which was technically true. He knew the shape of what he'd done but not the precise theory behind it, and he was not yet ready to give Dumbledore the precise theory. That was a decision he and Hermione would make together, and Hermione was not in this room. Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment. "Harry," he said, gently. "You can be direct with me." "I know I can be," Harry said. "I'm choosing to be cautious instead." A pause. Something moved through Dumbledore's expression that Harry couldn't fully read, not offense, not annoyance. Something closer to recalibration. Like a man who had been drawing a map and has just discovered the terrain is considerably more interesting than the map. "That is your right," Dumbledore said, after a moment. "Thank you," Harry said. "I am not your adversary." "I know that." Harry looked at him directly. "I also know that you knew Quirrell was compromised before tonight. You knew what was in the castle. You designed those protections and then you left." He said this without accusation, just laid it out, plainly, the facts as he understood them. "I'd like to understand why." Dumbledore was quiet. The candles moved. Fawkes was gone, and his perch sat empty, and the office was full of the soft sounds of its own mechanisms, small silver things on various tables spinning and clicking with the industry of things left running. "I believed," Dumbledore said carefully, "that the protections were sufficient. That Voldemort would not be able to pass them without my awareness. And that if he tried, would be able to return in time." "You were almost wrong," Harry said. "Yes," Dumbledore said. "Just that. Without qualification. I was almost wrong." Something in the room shifted slightly, the particular shift of a very powerful man conceding a point that cost him something to concede. Harry recognized it because he'd been watching for it, watching to see whether Dumbledore was the kind of person who could say I was wrong or whether he was the other kind, the kind whose calculation of the greater good ran so deep that individual wrongs never quite registered as such. "He's not dead," Harry said. "Voldemort. He dispersed. He'll find another host or another way back." "Yes," Dumbledore said. "He will. But he is weakened considerably. Tonight bought us time." He looked at Harry with an expression that had become, over the course of this conversation, something more honest than Harry had expected. "Considerably more time than I had anticipated acquiring." He paused. "You and your friends were extraordinary tonight." "They were," Harry said. "Ron Weasley solved a life-sized chess problem and took himself off the board to do it. Neville Longbottom stayed to look after him when he could have run. Hermione," he stopped. "Hermione solved your logic puzzle in about 4 minutes." "I had rather thought that would slow things down longer," Dumbledore said, with the specific dry warmth of someone who can appreciate being bested. "She's better at logic than whoever designed it," Harry said, simply. "Evidently." Dumbledore folded his hands on the desk. The stone sat between them. "Harry. I want to say something to you, and I ask that you receive it as what it is rather than as anything else." Harry waited. "You are not a weapon," Dumbledore said. "I am aware that the wizarding world has been, in various ways, preparing you for a role since before you were old enough to understand roles. I am aware that I have contributed to that, in ways that I am beginning to see more clearly than I once did." He looked at the stone. "What happened tonight was not what I had planned. It was better. And it was better because you made choices I had not anticipated, including the choice to be here at all." He met Harry's eyes. "I am glad you were here." Harry looked at him. He thought about the mirror of Ariste and his mother's face and the way Dumbledore had answered the question about what he saw. He thought about the cloak, which had arrived without a note, which had arrived from somewhere. "The cloak," Harry said. "You sent it." Dumbledore's expression said yes without saying yes. "It was my father's," Harry said. "It was," Dumbledore said. "I had it for some time. I thought you might have need of it." A pause. It seemed like the right moment to give it back. Harry thought about this. About the calculation involved in that gift, the timing of it, the anonymity, the way it had led him to the mirror and to a conversation that had been useful even though neither of them had known how useful until now. "You planned for me to find the mirror," Harry said. "I hoped you might," Dumbledore said. "It seemed likely, given what I know of you." "What do you know of me?" Another pause, longer. "I know," Dumbledore said, "that you are considerably more than your scar. I knew that when you were a year old, and I have spent the time since then doing an imperfect job of acting on that knowledge." He looked at his hands. "I know that something happened to you this year that was not in any plan I made, and that it has changed things in ways I am still assessing." "Still assessing," Harry said. The echo was deliberate. "A pointed observation," Dumbledore said, and something in his expression came close to rueful. "Yes. I see your meaning." Harry stood. He looked at the stone on the desk. "What happens to it?" "Nicholas Flamel and I have discussed it," Dumbledore said. "We have agreed that its continued existence creates a risk that outweighs the benefits." He looked at the stone with an expression that was not quite grief, the expression of a man who has made a hard decision and is not pretending it wasn't hard. "It will be destroyed." "He'll die," Harry said. "Flamel. Without the elixir." "He has had a very long life," Dumbledore said. "Long enough to face what comes next with equanimity, or so he tells me." A pause. "There are worse things than death, Harry." "I know," Harry said. He said it with the certainty of someone who has stood in a room with something that had survived its own death and understood, from that encounter, why death as a natural ending was not the worst of the options. He picked up his cloak from the chair where he'd set it and moved toward the door. "Harry," Dumbledore said, and Harry stopped. "There is one thing more I should say." He was quiet for a moment. "The bond you carry, I have been aware of it since October. I have said nothing because," he paused, and the pause had the quality of someone choosing honesty over convenience. "Because I was not certain how to address it, and I have learned, over many years, that uncertainty handled poorly causes considerably more damage than uncertainty acknowledged. So I said nothing and watched and hoped to understand it before I spoke." Harry turned around. "What I have come to understand," Dumbledore said, "is that it is not mine to address at all." He met Harry's eyes with a steadiness that cost him something. "It belongs to you. And to Miss Granger. And to whatever that old magic decided on a train in September." He spread his hands slightly. "I have no framework for it that does justice to what it is. I suspect the existing frameworks don't either." "They don't," Harry said. "We've looked." "No," Dumbledore said, with a quiet certainty. "I imagine you have found references. But references to ancient magic are not the same as the thing itself." He looked at the stone one more time. "Take care of yourself, Harry. And of Miss Granger." A pause. "She is formidable. She's the most formidable person I've ever met," Harry said. Dumbledore smiled. It reached all the way to his eyes, and it was the genuine version, the one that wasn't about performance or management. "Then you are both very fortunate," he said. Harry left. The hospital wing was white and morning light and smelled of potions, and it held Ron in the bed nearest the door with a bandage on his head and a cup of something steaming in his hands, and Neville in the next bed being checked over by Madame Pomfrey with the efficient attention of someone who had long since stopped being surprised by what students did to themselves, and Hermione seated in the chair beside Ron's bed with a book open and her eyes not on it. She looked up when Harry came in. Her eyes went immediately to his face, his hands, the general physical state of him, and then to the slight change in his expression that told her the conversation had gone the way it needed to go, and she set the book down on her knee. Harry sat in the chair on Ron's other side and Ron looked at him and said, "How's the headmaster?" "Thoughtful," Harry said. "That's either good or bad." "Both," Harry said. Ron accepted this with the nod of someone who has learned that both is frequently the honest answer. His color was better than it had been in the corridor, and Madame Pomfrey had clearly been efficient about the head wound, and he held his cup with both hands and looked at Harry with an expression that had something in it Harry hadn't seen from Ron in a while, the clean straightforward version, without the layer under it that had been developing since September. "You should know," Ron said, "that I'm going to be telling this story for the rest of my life." Chess problem. Life-sized. Checkmate. He looked at his cup. "The part where I got taken by the Queen I might adjust slightly." "You were brilliant," Harry said. "Genuinely. The version where you get taken by the Queen stays in because it's the truest part." Ron looked at him. "You moved yourself into danger so we could get through," Harry said. "That's the story. That's the best part of the story." Ron looked at his cup again, and the back of his neck was red, and he said nothing for a moment and then said, "Right. Well. The Queen was enormous." "Terrifying," Harry agreed. From across Ron's bed, Hermione looked at Harry and in her expression was something very quiet and very warm, the expression of someone watching a thing they care about handled exactly right. Madame Pomfrey came and checked Harry over with the thoroughness of professional suspicion. The scar got particular attention, and she gave him something for the residual pain that was cold going down and warm about 30 seconds later, and she told him in no uncertain terms that his scar showed evidence of significant magical stress and he was to come back immediately if it worsened, which she said with the tone of someone who was not confident this instruction would be followed and was documenting it regardless. She left. The four of them were alone in the hospital wing in the white morning light. Neville said, from his bed, "Are we allowed to talk about what happened? Or is this one of those things that gets sorted away into the official version and never comes up again?" "It'll come up again," Harry said. "But probably not in a way any of us can control." "The Ministry will want to know," Hermione said, in the tone of someone who had been thinking about this already. "Quirrell will be examined. The stone's existence in the castle will become known. There will be questions about why 4 first years were below the 3rd floor corridor." She looked at Harry. "Dumbledore will try to manage the narrative." "He'll try," Harry said. "But the facts are the facts." "The facts include a soul bond," she said. "Quiet. Direct. Which is going to become apparent to anyone with sufficient sensitivity who examines either of us closely." She met his eyes. "We should decide how we want to handle it before someone else decides for us." "What are you two talking about?" Ron said, with the particular tired frustration of someone who has been tangentially aware of a significant thing for months and has decided tonight was the night he was owed an explanation. Harry and Hermione looked at each other. The kind of look that was a complete conversation. "When we were on the Hogwarts Express," Harry said, turning to Ron, "Hermione touched my scar. Just reached out. Curiosity." He paused. "It triggered something. Ancient magic. A bond between our magical cores that apparently," he looked at Hermione, because she would say it more precisely. "Our magical natures are complementary," she said, in the careful measured way she used when she was being precise rather than comprehensive. "The magic recognized that and responded to it. It's called an anima vinculum. It means we're connected. Our magic resonates. We can sense each other's general state and our spells amplify when we're near each other." She looked at Ron steadily, which was the part that took something. "It's why we knew certain things about each other very quickly. Why we work the way we work. It's not," she paused. "It's not something we did deliberately." Ron was quiet. He turned his cup in his hands. His face was doing the careful thing it did when he was actually thinking, not the reflex thing. "Since September," he said. "Since the train," Harry said. "And you've been researching it." "Hermione's been researching it," Harry said. "I've been receiving the research," Hermione said, with a dryness that was affectionate. "Receiving and applying," Harry corrected. Ron was quiet for another moment. Neville, to his credit, had the excellent social instinct to remain very still and let this happen without comment. Does it mean something? Ron said, and the question had more weight than its surface. The two of you. Does it mean something specific about, we don't know yet, Harry said, honestly. It's 11 months old and we're 11. The magic knows what it means. We're still figuring it out. Ron looked at the ceiling. Something was happening in his face that was resolving slowly, and what it resolved into was, not easy, not immediate, but genuine. The working through of someone who is choosing the better version of themselves rather than the reflexive one. Right, he said. All right. He looked at both of them. Am I still your friend, or is this one of those things that reorganizes everything? You're still our friend, Harry said. You took yourself off a chess board for us. I might need some time, Ron said. To be properly all right with it. Take the time, Hermione said. That's a reasonable thing to ask for. Ron nodded, slowly. Then he said, the chess problem really was brilliant, wasn't it? Exceptional, Hermione said, and she meant it, and Ron heard that she meant it, and the tension in the room went down by a meaningful increment. Neville said, quietly, I won't tell anyone. About the bond. If that's what you want. Harry looked at him. Thank you, Neville. It's yours to tell, Neville said, with the simple ethical clarity that was his particular genius. Not mine. They stayed in the hospital wing until Madame Pomfrey came back at 8 and declared that Ron and Neville needed sleep and Harry and Hermione needed breakfast, and all four of them needed to stay within the school grounds until further notice, which she delivered with the authority of someone who was not interested in what Dumbledore or the Ministry or anybody else had to say about it. They went to breakfast. The great hall was quiet, it was early, and a Saturday, and the remaining students were not yet down, and they ate with the specific thoroughness of people who had been through something significant and whose bodies had strong opinions about bacon. Harry ate a great deal. Hermione ate a reasonable amount with unusual speed. Neither of them talked much, which was fine, because the silence between them had been a functional thing all year and it was no less functional now. The owls came at 9:30. Not 1. 7. 7 owls arriving simultaneously at the Gryffindor stretch of the table, which had never happened to Harry before and which produced, in the students who were now trickling in for breakfast, a ripple of attention that Harry could feel without looking. He looked at the letters. The Ministry of Magic. The Ministry of Magic again. The Wiesengemot. A journalist at the Daily Prophet whose name he didn't recognize. Cornelius Fudge, who was apparently the Minister for Magic. A wizard he'd never heard of from the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. And one, unmarked, that had the specific quality of something personal. He opened the personal one first. It was from Nicholas Flamel. Old handwriting, very precise, the handwriting of someone who had been writing for centuries and had developed the patience for it. It said, I understand you held something of mine last night. Thank you for treating it with appropriate care. You are, I think, rather more than the prophets foresaw. That is usually how it goes with the interesting ones. NF Harry folded it and put it in his pocket. Hermione was looking at her own stack of letters with the expression of someone who had expected this and was not pleased about the timing but was prepared. The Ministry is going to want a statement, she said. I know. Fudge will want to manage this. Whatever this is going to be, the story, the implication that Voldemort was at Hogwarts, the fact that 4 first years went below the trapdoor, she set her own letters down neatly. He'll want it quiet. It's not going to be quiet, Harry said. No, she said. It isn't. He looked at the Ministry letters. He thought about what it meant to be 11 years old with 7 institutional letters before breakfast, and what it would mean going forward, not the end of this year but the shape of the years ahead, the way the world had positioned him whether he'd asked for it or not. He thought about the prophecy, which Dumbledore had referenced obliquely and which he didn't know the full text of yet and was going to find out, because not knowing things about his own life was no longer something he was prepared to accept. He thought about Voldemort saying this isn't over. He thought about his own reply, but it's over tonight. I'm going to need to understand everything, he said. The prophecy. The full history of what Voldemort was and what he did. What Horcruxes are. I found a reference to that word in one of your texts last month and you redirected the conversation. Hermione went still. What are Horcruxes? Harry said. She looked at him for a moment with the expression of someone deciding whether to have a conversation. Then, objects imbued with a fragment of a soul. Created through an act of extreme evil. They anchor the soul to life even if the body is destroyed. She looked at her hands on the table. There are references, old, dark, obscure, suggesting that someone might have made more than one. Voldemort made more than one, Harry said. Not a guess. I think so, she said. The cold you felt from Quirrell, that wasn't the whole of him. That was a fragment. Which implies the whole of him is fragmented. Distributed. She looked at him. It means tonight wasn't the end. Tonight was never the end, Harry said. But it was the beginning of something with better odds. She was quiet for a moment. You're not frightened. No, he said. I am, she said. Slightly. A manageable amount. I know, he said. That's not the same as unprepared. No, she said. It isn't. She straightened, the small physical adjustment of someone returning to their operational posture. We need to research Horcruxes. Carefully, most of the relevant texts will be restricted or worse. We need to understand the full extent of what we're dealing with before next year. Before next year, Harry agreed. And we need to deal with the ministry letters. Hermione. Yes. Eat your breakfast first. She looked at her plate. She had, in the last 5 minutes of conversation, left her toast to go cold. She picked it up. Fine, she said. But then the letters. Then the letters, he said. They ate. Around them the great hall filled in slowly, ordinary Saturday morning, people drifting down in various states of wakefulness with no knowledge of what had been happening in the substrata of their castle while they slept. The Weasley twins appeared and sat down with the cheerful energy of people who had no idea of the specific events but could read the general atmosphere and were curious about it. Percy appeared and looked at Harry's stack of letters and went visibly pale. Seamus and Dean came in arguing about something Quidditch-related that had nothing to do with anything. Lavender Brown took one look at Harry's face and decided to sit at the other end of the table, which was good social instincts. The morning light moved through the high windows and lay in long strips across the flagstone floor, and the hall smelled like toast and tea and the particular mixture of 100 people's mornings, and Harry sat in the middle of it and felt, with every part of himself, that this was his life. This was actually his life, and he was in it, and it was not the life of a boy in a cupboard waiting for something to happen to him. He picked up the ministry letter from Fudge and opened it. It was precisely what he'd expected, formal, cautious, carefully worded to communicate urgency without specifying what the ministry was urgently worried about. Fudge wanted to meet. Fudge wanted to understand. Fudge's letter had the quality of someone who had been told something alarming at 7 in the morning and had responded by immediately writing letters to manage it. Harry set it on the table and looked at it and thought, I'm 11 years old and the Minister for Magic wants a meeting. He thought, good. He wrote back, in the clear direct handwriting he'd been developing all year, a single paragraph acknowledging the letter, confirming his willingness to meet and specifying that he would be bringing Hermione Granger and that any meeting would need to include Headmaster Dumbledore. He sealed it and tied it to the ministry owl, which had been sitting at the end of the table with the patience of a professional, and sent it off. Hermione had watched this process. You added me, she said. Obviously, he said. She looked at the letter going out through the high windows. You know that's going to raise questions. About why you're bringing a classmate to a ministry meeting. They'll figure it out eventually, Harry said. I'd rather they figure it out in a context we've chosen than in one we haven't. She considered this. You're choosing to disclose the bond. I'm choosing to stop hiding it in the places where it matters, he said. Which is different from making an announcement. He looked at her. Is that all right with you? She held his gaze. The bond, which had been at its now familiar stage 2 hum all morning, was warm and present and doing something that it sometimes did when they looked directly at each other for more than a moment, a slight deepening, a harmonic quality, like a note finding its resonance. Yes, she said. That's all right. The ministry came on Wednesday. 2 officials from the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, Fudge himself, small, round, in a lime-green bowler hat that was making a strong case for being the most aggressively unfortunate headwear in the country, and a woman from the Department of Mysteries whose name they were not given and who stood in the back of Dumbledore's office with the professional silence of someone for whom information was a resource to be collected rather than exchanged. Harry sat across from Fudge with Hermione beside him and Dumbledore at the head of the table, and he answered questions with the efficient precision of someone who had decided in advance what they were willing to give and what they weren't. He told them what had happened below the trapdoor. He told them about Quirrell. He told them that Voldemort had been present as a parasitic soul fragment and had dispersed. He told them the stone was in Dumbledore's possession and its fate was between Dumbledore and Flammel. He did not tell them about the mechanism by which he'd broken the binding, and when Fudge pressed on this point, how exactly did you manage to free yourself from a binding cast by you-know-who, a feat which frankly no one with any experience would claim is straightforward, Harry looked at him steadily and said, I used the magical resources available to me. Fudge looked at Hermione. And Miss Granger. What was your role in last night's events? I solved the potion logic puzzle, she said. Provided strategic intelligence regarding the nature of the challenges. And served as support and backup for Harry. Support and backup, the woman from the Department of Mystery said, in the flat way of someone repeating a phrase to mark it. She had said almost nothing in the meeting and this was the first time she'd addressed either of them directly. She was looking at the 2 of them with the unblinking attention of someone who was seeing something that her ministry colleagues weren't. The 2 of you. You work together closely. Yes, Harry said. Closely in a specific way, she said. She looked at Dumbledore. He looked back at her with the benign serenity of someone who is not going to help her. I'm not sure what you're suggesting, Hermione said, in the precise polite tone she used when she was entirely sure what someone was suggesting and was making them say it explicitly. There's a resonance signature, the woman said. Between the 2 of you. I'm not certain I've encountered it outside of theoretical documentation. What kind of documentation? Hermione said, which was, Harry thought, perfectly played, because it shifted the frame from the ministry's assessment to Hermione's ground, which was research. The woman paused. Anima vinculum is not a category we have active records for, she said carefully. It predates our current frameworks considerably. It does, Hermione said. The earliest comprehensive documentation is from Aldrich of Mercia, 9th century. The secondary sources are incomplete and occasionally contradictory. It's been an interesting year of research. The woman from the Department of Mysteries looked at Hermione Granger, 11 years old, bushy hair, sitting with perfect composure across a table from the entire apparatus of magical governance, and something moved in her professional face that was very nearly admiration. I see, she said. We're not a resource, Harry said, to the room in general but to the Department of Mysteries woman specifically, without any particular emphasis, the way you state a fact about the weather. We're not a tool or a subject or an asset. What we are is our own, and how we use it is our decision. He looked at Fudge, who had gone slightly pinkish. That's all I want to say about it. Fudge cleared his throat. Yes, well. We appreciate your candor, Harry. He had developed the habit, in the course of this meeting, of treating Harry with the slightly nervous deference of someone whose instinct said this is a child but whose evidence kept saying something else. The ministry's position is naturally one of support for both of you, and, we know, Harry said. "Thank you." Fudge took this as a conclusion, which it was, and began wrapping up the meeting with the practiced efficiency of a politician recognizing when the room has shifted against further discussion. The officials gathered their parchments. The Department of Mysteries woman stood and looked at Harry and Hermione one more time with her assessing gaze and then nodded, once, the nod of one professional acknowledging another, which was deeply strange from someone in her 40s toward two 11-year-olds and also exactly appropriate. When they were gone and the door of Dumbledore's office was closed, Dumbledore leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment and said, "That went rather better than I expected." "Did you expect it to go badly?" Harry said. "I expected it to go longer," Dumbledore said. "You shortened it considerably." "We said what needed to be said," Hermione said. "You said considerably more than that," Dumbledore said, with the warmth of someone genuinely entertained. "You said it clearly, compactly, and without the kind of deference that invites the people receiving it to start negotiating." "Deference invites negotiation," Hermione said. "We weren't interested in negotiating." "No," Dumbledore said. "I noticed." He looked between them. "The woman from the Department of Mysteries. Her name is Croaker." "She is not," he paused, choosing. "She is someone whose attention is worth being aware of. Not hostile, not friendly. Interested. The Department of Mysteries is interested in things it doesn't understand, and anima vinculum is something it doesn't understand." He met Harry's eyes. "I tell you this not as a warning but as information. What you choose to do with it is, as you said, your decision." "Thank you," Harry said. He meant it. They left. The corridor outside Dumbledore's office was sunlit and quiet, and they walked away from it toward the staircase with the particular freedom of people who have just been in a formal setting and are no longer in it, and Hermione said, after about 30 steps, "He's changed." "Dumbledore?" Harry said. "He's not, he's still managing things," she said. "He's still thinking several moves ahead. But the way he talked to us today was different from how he's talked to us before. There was less," she turned the word over. "Architecture," she said. "Less of the sense that everything he said was constructed to produce a specific response." "He's recalibrating," Harry said. "We're not what he expected." "What did he expect?" "A boy who survived something," Harry said. "Defined by it. Moving through the world in the specific way of someone who's been told who they are since before they could speak." He looked at the corridor ahead. "And a year of being at Hogwarts was supposed to, not change that, but settle it. Give it a context. Instead," Hermione started. "Instead we're something else," Harry said. "Together. Which wasn't in the plans." "Plans should be made with more flexibility," Hermione said, which was Hermione being wry, and Harry recognized it and appreciated it. They went out onto the grounds. It was a warm June afternoon, genuinely warm, the kind of day that feels like a reward for surviving a long year, and the lake was flat and bright and the grounds were green in every direction, and the castle rose behind them and the sky was very large and very blue. Harry sat down on the grass near the lake because the day demanded it. Hermione sat down beside him, tucking her knees under her with the unself-conscious practicality of someone whose relationship to grass and sitting was entirely functional. For a while they just sat. The bond did the thing it did when they were in proximity and nothing was requiring immediate action. It settled into a low, warm hum, like a fire in a room you're not in but can hear. Stage 2 was fully established now, had been for weeks, and there were moments where it moved into something that was Stage 3 territory, the confluence, the deeper access, but those moments were unforced, never deliberate, always arriving sideways and receding the same way. Harry thought about Aldrich's notes. About the 4 stages and the fourth, the final one, eternal declaration, which the scholar had described as magic speaking not to the pair but to magic itself, making something inviolable and permanent and recognized by everything that was magic in the world. He thought, we're 11. He thought, there's time. He thought, There's time and it's already there, and the time is just the distance between what it is and what it will be called. What are you thinking about? Hermione said. Stage 4, he said. She was quiet. We're 11, she said, which was what he'd thought, and the parallel arrived with the small warmth of things that happened between them like this, without choreography. I know, he said. I just meant, it's there. It's the direction. She looked at the lake. The giant squid was doing something slow and tentacular just below the surface, visible as a shadow. Aldrich describes it as the ancient magic speaking its final word, she said. Recognizing something it's been building toward. She turned a piece of grass over in her fingers. He said it cannot be unnamed. Is that frightening? Harry said. She considered this with actual consideration rather than reflex reassurance. No, she said. It would be if it were happening to me without my having any say in it. But it isn't, it's happening with me. With both of us. She looked at him sideways. It's more like, something that's true, becoming more completely true. A pause. Which should probably sound more alarming and doesn't. It doesn't, Harry agreed. The magical theory says the progression requires catalysis from shared experience under pressure, she said. Which we have now. Substantially. Substantially, he said. So it may progress further, she said. This year, or next year, or at some point when the circumstances, she stopped. We should probably talk about what it means. More directly than we have. Right now? Harry said. Not necessarily right now, she said, slightly quickly, and Harry noted this and stored it and did not comment on it, which was its own kind of conversation. Eventually, he said. Eventually, she agreed. And the word sat between them comfortably, not a deferral but a placement. This goes here, for now, and we know where it is. He looked at the castle. At its towers and battlements and the way the afternoon light hit the stone and made it golden. He thought about September, the train, the first sight of the castle from the lake, the 11-year-old he'd been then, who had never owned anything and never been chosen by anything and had spent an entire childhood in a world that had no category for him. He thought about what the world had tried to make him. A symbol. A sacrifice. A piece in someone else's game, valuable for what he'd survived rather than what he was. He thought about what he was. I want to tell you something, he said. Hermione turned to look at him with the full attention she gave things that required it. I don't know what I am yet, he said. In the large sense, what I'll be, what all of this builds into. I don't know the full shape of it. He looked at her. But I know who I'm figuring it out with. And that matters. That matters more than the rest of it, right now. Hermione held his gaze for a moment, and through the bond the warm unnamed thing was present and clear and unhidden, the thing that had no vocabulary yet but had been building since September with the patience of something that knew it had time. Yes, she said. Simply. Me too. The afternoon kept going. The lake moved. The squid receded. Some distance away, the Weasley twins could be heard testing something that had a suspicious probability of being a prototype for something that would eventually be very popular and technically against at least 4 school rules. A group of third years was throwing something into the lake with the experimental spirit of people who knew about the squid and were curious about its preferences. Ordinary. Fully, deeply ordinary. And underneath the ordinary, steady and warm and certain, the bond. The ancient magic's recognition. The thing that had looked at 2 children on a train in September and said yes, and which now, 11 months later, in the light of a June afternoon with the year's weight settled, said it again. Yes. Not louder. Not more dramatic. The ancient magic was not interested in drama. It had been doing this longer than language, longer than schools or governments or the stories people told about chosen boys and dark lords. It had been recognizing correspondences since there was magic to recognize them with, and it would continue after everything built on top of it had changed beyond recognition, and what it said about Harry Potter and Hermione Granger it had said once, completely, and would not need to repeat. Yes. These two. Exactly these two. Already. Always. Harry looked at the castle one more time, at the school that had been the first thing he could call his, and felt it, all of it, the year, the choices, the things he'd been and the things he was becoming, the bond humming at its warm frequency, Hermione beside him reading something she'd produced from somewhere because of course she had, the distant chaos of the twins, the way the light moved on the water. He was 11 years old, and something ancient had decided he mattered, and he had spent a year deciding for himself, and going forward he would keep deciding, and he was not afraid of any of it. The year ended. The bonds held. The magic remembered. Everything that had been declared remained declared. And the world, for the first time in his life, had no idea what was coming.